Tick-tock, time to rock. Good evening, good morning, good afternoon to everyone who's watching from all over the world. It's your friendly neighborhood philosopher here, D. Wood, and I've got my friendly neighborhood theologian here, Anthony Rogers. And this is... Does this day have a name? So you got Easter Sunday, you got Good Friday, you've got... what? I always forget the one for Thursday. What's the Thursday?
Maundy Thursday?
Maundy Thursday, yeah. Maundy Thursday. Does Saturday have a name?
Holy Saturday?
Is that what they call it? Because they also call Monday Thursday Holy Thursday.
Yeah. Some will focus on what Christ is doing on Saturday, either speaking of his body interred in the tomb or his descent into Abraham's bosom or something along those lines, and name it after that fashion.
Well,
Holy Saturday standard.
Well, we've got, was not planning to go live today until last night, ladies and gentlemen, when it turned out that Wes Huff had appeared on Piers Morgan Live, making a case for the reliability of the Gospels and Jesus' resurrection, and they even started talking about Islam a bit. Now, that was very interesting. So, was not planning to go live today because AP has some... he has some night church stuff now that he's a Kate Schumann. You heard about AP being a Kate Schumann, Anthony?
I did.
So he's a Kate Schumann now, and apparently they have him doing. I think the Eastern Orthodox roll hard for Easter, so they do a bunch of stuff for Easter. So anyway, we're just gonna not do any live streams this weekend. Focus on church and family. But then we had some stuff drop, and it's something where, okay, Wes Huff is on Piers Morgan Live talking about the resurrection. We could always talk about that later, but wait, it kind of makes more sense to be doing it on Easter weekend. You know what I mean? So, but anyway, so we're gonna check out some of that. It's actually long, so we'll get through part of it. But people want to watch more of it can check out more. But so Anthony, before we jump into this, you had a debate very recently.
Yeah, I debated an unknown, which I was excited about because typically when I debate somebody, I put forth a lot of effort to read whatever they've written, listen to whatever they've put out there, and that way I think it in that respect, or with respect to that, creates a good debate, a good interaction. You kind of know what to expect, and they should know what to expect from you. At the same time, there's something excited about debating a guy that you've never heard of. You don't know what his background competence is. Yeah, so that was exciting, and actually I really liked this guy compared to others that I've debated. Not that I've not liked others, but this guy was, refreshing in some ways. For one thing, I guess, that was refreshing, there are other things that weren't, that were standard fare for Islamic propagandists, but the one thing that was refreshing is he didn't complain when I would say something without paring down the rough edges of it. Mm-hmm. He got up there and he gave it his all. He was spunky, enthusiastic. I think at one point he turned to me and he said something like, he kind of said, like, I hope you don't mind.
That I'm passionate or something. Yeah, he said something like that. Or what did he say?
Yeah, it was something along those lines. Yeah. I think he said enthusiastic or something.
Yeah, something like that.
And then I got up there and I said, well, I'm happy to hear that because I intend to be all kinds of enthusiastic in my response. Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I like that. So that to me was
just so you know, I liked it too when he said that because I was like, oh, he just opened the door. He just extended what's the opposite of an olive branch? But he extended a branch of, okay, it's okay for us to dial up the rhetoric a little bit. And so I thought that was cool.
And you missed the next day. We went back to the university and did another session of just Q&A. And towards the end, he finally said something particularly scurrilous that we've heard a lot. But he started lambasting the character of Noah and Lot and so forth in the Bible. And as soon as he did that, I was like, there he goes again, giving me the green light, because we weren't debating the character of their false prophet. So yeah. I didn't have
it had no relevance in the debate, and yet
Right.
he opened the door.
Right. So I gave the laundry list on Muhammad, and he was none too pleased, but he still kept his cool to some extent.
Yeah, and it was yeah, there are a couple of things that stand out. One, he because I didn't know who he was either, but he was a better speaker than I thought he was going to be. So he's actually a good, like, fiery, passionate speaker and stuff. So that's cool for debate. Arguments, I would say. I mean, it's a lot of standard Dawa stuff, but beyond terrible in that you have a topic. He doesn't touch the topic. But what's interesting about the takeaway is that it ultimately leads right to the Islamic dilemma, because for anyone who doesn't know what happened, the debate was, what did the prophets teach about God, something like that. And you guys were going to have part of the debate focusing on whether the prophets taught that God is a Trinity, and then part of it focusing on whether the prophets taught Tawheed. That's correct?
Yeah.
Like, so it's what did the prophets teach about God, and then you're going to have examine Christian claims and then Muslim claims. You came out and gave your entire presentation from the prophets, going through what the prophets said. He gets up, doesn't say anything about the prophets, and just makes fun of Christianity the entire time. And that was really interesting, because it's like he was conceding, which throughout the debate it sounded like he was conceding. Yes, the prophets as we have them now obviously don't support this, but that's because it's all been corrupted, which is why that's interesting, because it seems like everything is ultimately going to lead to the Islamic dilemma now. Like, wait,
Yeah.
you can't say that because your scriptures affirm our scriptures.
At the same time, I like to point out, even apart from other things that can be said in defense of the preservation of the Bible and its present authority and so forth, it's passing strange if you say the Bible was corrupted, and we know what it looked like before the coming of Jesus. So it has to be that which was corrupted. Mm-hmm. It's a remarkable thing that a book that becomes corrupted ends up teaching in advance Christianity, and even accurately predicting in quite exhaustive detail the outlines of Christ's life and the meanings of it and so forth. That to me strikes me as quite miraculous. It looks like a miracle of providence, right? The original scriptures said one thing, but then God, who's sovereign, according to the Muslim, they would grant this. He's in charge of history, and his word under his watch becomes this book that testifies to the belief that Jesus is recorded to have taught and that his apostles are recorded to. In fact, when he did attack the scriptures, I didn't mention this point, but he mostly was attacking the New Testament, which was even more irrelevant than if he, I'm
because you're talking about the prophets. Yeah.
Yeah. But anyways, I think there's so many problems even with the claim that the Bible's corrupted for the Muslim. If it's corrupted, then it ends up looking really, really bad still for the Muslim, because it's Allah's book who got corrupted. Many books. In fact, I mentioned in the debate that if the Torah was given by Allah, the Zabur, the Psalms were given by Allah, the Injil was given by Allah, and all those got corrupted, then it's Allah who dropped the ball several times over. But when you roll into that, the fact that it's not just the prophets mentioned in the Quran, but it mentions others that allegedly were sent to other nations, which means the word of every prophet was corrupted. So Allah's word is corrupted times without number. And how are you supposed to trust this deity? He seems like a bungler.
Hey, give them the analogy you used in the debate.
Oh, yeah. So I said, imagine you needed heart surgery. Of course, you're not so foolish as to trust your care to a doctor with, a bad track record. Imagine you examine a guy and it shows that he's lost every patient he's ever operated on. In fact, he's lost them right there on the operating table before they ever left the building. And the reason I make it this way is because it's not just that Muslims have to say the Quran or the Bible was corrupted. They have to say it was corrupted spectacularly early. Because we have, for example, with respect to the New Testament, documents that go clear back into the 2nd century. And we've got them translated in the 2nd century into Syriac, into Latin, into Coptic. We've got testimony to what they said. We've got the Talmud, for example, with respect to the Old Testament. It quotes at least 25% of the Old Testament just in the course of, giving its various comments, and then it alludes to many others. But then the Dead Sea Scrolls that come before it. I mean, we've got remarkably early attestation to the text of Scripture, and so it had to have been corrupted really, really early, not just corrupted. And so Allah had to fumble really early, and he had to do it a lot, and he had to do it in many, many different places. He just looks like somebody who's more than a bungler than any bungler I've ever seen in history. And of course, his excuse is, well, Allah didn't intend to preserve those. He intended to preserve the Quran. Okay, so you don't have to worry about this bad track record of Allah's book always getting corrupted. You can still trust his competence with respect to the Quran. Well, imagine, going back to the analogy, imagine the heart surgeon says, I didn't intend for all those other patients to survive, but I really mean it in your case, right? Are you going to trust him to take care of you? Not me.
Yeah, and yeah, so you had a couple interesting points there. By the way, I was over here on the side just because someone requested to share a link to the debate in the description, so I went ahead and added that here. But yeah, guys, so Anthony spends his opening statement quoting the Old Testament prophets and what they said about God, and shows that it doesn't line up with the Islamic view, but does line up with the Christian view. And the response of the Muslim was, you can't trust the scriptures. And as Anthony points out, he's going after the New Testament, which wasn't Anthony's focus at all, and wasn't the topic of the debate. But what Anthony was just pointing out was, isn't it interesting? Because these books are from before the time of Christ, and the Muslim is saying they were corrupted. So they were corrupted before the time of Christ. Isn't it interesting that when they were corrupted, they just happened to line up with what would eventually become Christian theology? Isn't that interesting that it just happened to line up with that? Before Christians started making the claims were already there in the corrupted Old Testament. But then you guys got into the Islamic dilemma stuff. And we're actually going to go through that, ladies and gentlemen, because we're going to be focusing a lot this year on the Islamic dilemma, and it is coming up everywhere. And there's a reason for everyone to learn this now. Once Christians start learning how to respond to Muslim objections, learning how to criticize Tawheed, learning to defend Christian beliefs against Muslim claims from the Bible, Muslims have to say your book's been corrupted. They have to. And if they lose that, their entire case falls apart. If you can show them that their book affirms your scriptures and that your scriptures teach Christianity and not Islam, ball game. So we'll be doing that. I also there's a couple things he said that I might want to make a little short, easy video on, like just things that are just completely made up. Like he said that Bart Ehrman was so confused by the Trinity that he became an atheist. And he says, you see, Christian theology is making people turn into atheists. And it's like, wait a minute, I've got his book on the problem of evil where he says, it's not Christianity. It's nothing in Christianity that made him an atheist. It's the problem of evil. If God existed, why would there be so much suffering? But that's something that would also apply to Islam as well. If God is watching over and God is merciful and so on, why do little babies suffer and so on? So
I should send you something. I was reading something from Ehrman the other day. In fact, before the debate, I didn't quote it. There was too much to say without that. But Ehrman has a whole article, and I think it's relatively recent, on his blog where he's mentioning that the Trinity doesn't strike him as irrational or grounds for dismissing Christianity. He grants that it's distinctive and unique and in some ways mysterious, but he says that the early Christian theologians that are codifying it were brilliant men. And so, he very clearly says that this isn't a grounds that he has for objecting to Christianity. And neither, along with your statement that he's very clear why he left Christianity, he's also pretty clear when it comes to the textual issues. He'll say one thing in certain contexts in his popular writings. People often note this. He's not very careful in those writings, or maybe he wants to leave a certain impression. But in his scholarly publications, he points out that this is the sort of thing that is true in all handwritten documents, and it's not the sort of thing that leaves us completely skeptical over what it actually said. It's not like these things really taught Islam or something foreign to what Christians believe today. He makes many statements. I have one statement where he says that basically the task of textual criticism is done for all intents and purposes. We've basically gotten as close to the original text as we can, and we're within.
Apart from finding some awesome new manuscript in the church attic or something like that, they've gone through the thousands of manuscripts.
Yeah.
Hey, send me the article you're talking about and any of that other stuff that would be relevant, because Muslims don't understand this, and then you've got a guy who starts spreading a lie about Bart Ehrman was so confused by the Trinity that he became an atheist, and they'll just spread that around forever unless we correct them on it. So it's a good time to correct them on this. Had a comment here from John Beavers. Do you know the laws about witnessing outside of mosques and where one can stand and present? If you're talking about the United States, just make sure you stand on public property, meaning stand on the sidewalk. Stand on the sidewalk. Don't block the sidewalk. Make sure there's room for people to walk down the sidewalk. But if you're on the sidewalk, that is public property. You have the Constitution protects your right on public sidewalks. So you can stand on the public sidewalks, and that's kind of what. There are ministries that do a lot of this. I do it sometimes when I'm with them for an event or something like this. But Christians will roll up to a mosque around the time when people are coming in or when people are leaving, and will be in the area on the public sidewalks around the place, so that as people are walking in from the surrounding area, you can hand them tracts, you can get into discussion. So you might hand them something as they're walking in. And then as they're leaving or whatever, you might want to get into a conversation with them. But yeah, Joe, and keep in mind, you are allowed to walk up. You're allowed to walk into the mosque. I mean, unless they tell you you're not allowed to walk in there for some reason, but you're allowed to walk in, walk on. If they're having people walk in and stuff, you're allowed to walk. If they tell you to leave, you have to leave. I wouldn't go on their property and start criticizing Islam or evangelizing or anything like that. But my point is, you could, in theory, and they would just say, get off our property, in which case you walk over to the sidewalk, and there you're good to go. So, yep, that is, as far as I know, the law in the U.S. I don't know what laws other places have, but in the U.S., you're good to go. All right, let's take these first couple super chats, then we'll jump into this Wes Huff video. First press button, now Kate Schumann. What's next? I don't know. What's after Kate Schumann, Anthony? What comes after Kate Schumann once he graduates from Kate Schumann School?
Oh. I'm like, what are you talking about? What is this? Well, he'd get baptized in the Orthodox Church.
Uh-huh. And do you graduate to some cooler level after that?
Well, it would depend what his aspirations are. I mean, people.
When does he become the Orthodox Pope? That's what we're asking.
I mean, there are positions that people can attain to. They could become a reader in the Orthodox Church, other things. I'm no expert in all of that, not being Eastern Orthodox. But also, there are other things like becoming a monk yeah. That's probably not going to happen. Mm-hmm. You don't think?
Nope. Nope. Doesn't Anthony have sermons to give tomorrow? You giving any sermons tomorrow?
I am.
What?
I am.
They're letting you speak on Easter?
I preach every Sunday.
Wow.
Sometimes I go from the church I preach at to the prison to preach on Sundays. So I preach back to back, and then in the evening sometimes.
That's pretty hardcore. Everyone, you can follow Anthony's channel. I've got the link to his channel in the description box. Does lots of good stuff. These live shows have ruined my life, beginning at 2 a.m. where I live. Love you, David, but I have to challenge you to a mubahala. I've already been in multiple mubahalas. I don't know if you've been following the Muhammad hijab thing, but everyone's challenging each other to mubahalas.
I think I did see that the Aisha person, I'm assuming that's a pseudonym. I haven't paid attention to everything, but I think she issued a challenge, didn't she?
Yeah.
I always call it the prayer duel, right? It's like
prayer battle, yeah. Yeah, and the AP, when he describes it, he says, so they get together and they state their beliefs, and then they pray for Allah's curse, and then they turn and walk away, and then they draw their pistols, and
Yeah, high noon.
Yeah.
Place at high noon.
Yeah, so she's challenging him to mubahala. So that's basically a situation where, okay, if neither one of us can really prove what happened, because a lot of it is he said, she said type thing, fine. We'll both state what we're claiming and then ask for Allah's curse on the liar. And so she's saying that, but as far as I've seen so far, hijab has refused. But then when he's talking to anyone else, he instantly starts going, I challenge you to mubahala, mubahala. And it's like, wait a minute, you're willing to go into mubahala with anyone else on the planet except this woman who's saying that you are married to her and you're saying she's a liar and so on. And AP pointed out, hijab is quick if anyone says anything false about him to at least threaten lawsuits, but he'll go through with the lawsuits as well. And so he describes himself as someone who will sue, who is quick to sue. But wait a minute, this woman's just lying about you being married to her and stuff, and you're not suing, you're not going the lawsuit direction. So anyway, definitely seems like she's the one who's telling the truth. We'll have to go through. Maybe she's not telling the truth about everything, but on the big issue, seems like he's lying and she's telling the truth. Let's see.
Interesting. All this talk of mubahala. It was the Christians of Najran that first brought this out.
Surah 3.
Mm-hmm. Of Muhammad, and they're actually pretty significant in many, many ways. In fact, I think I brought them up in that debate. So one of the evidences I supplied from the Old Testament is God speaking in plural,
and you mentioned Surah 3:7, I think.
Well, yeah. So he tried to reply to the Bible's use of plurals for God and say, well, the Quran does this too. That's not, of course, helpful at all because it's a 7th century book. You have to justify using it to interpret the Bible. When we go back to the Bible, it's an entirely different context. But the worst problem for this guy is, I quoted a scholar. I thought it was funny. I quoted M.A.S. Abdel Halim, very well-known scholar. Solidly,
he's the one who did the Oxford translation of the Quran.
Yeah.
Wait, whoa, hang on, wait. Got my Quran's right here. This guy.
Yeah. So I don't know if you caught this, but he got up there and he said, I didn't catch the name of the guy he's talking about, but he's not a scholar. And I thought, how are you going to say somebody's not a scholar? Yeah. You don't know who I quoted, yeah. Right? And I said his name really clearly. But
guys, pause. Everyone catch that? Because that was actually hilarious, right? The guy gets up. So Anthony quotes Halim, the guy who translated the Oxford Quran. And this sheikh that he's debating gets up and says, I didn't catch the name of the guy he's talking about, but he's not a scholar. And Anthony's response is like, you didn't hear the name. How do you know he's a scholar? How do you know if he's a scholar or not?
Yeah.
Isn't that weird?
And so he wrote an article on iltifat. That's the
changing of the pronouns, that issue.
Yeah, and you know how Muslims do it. It's gobbledygook in the Quran, but they pretend like it's some wondrous thing.
It's making awesome points. Yeah.
Yeah. So you can't follow Allah constantly talking first, third person, and so forth. Plural, singular. You don't know when he's talking about himself or someone else. And anyways,
pause. Just for people who don't know what we're talking about, you have all these passages in the Quran where the pronoun that Allah is using constantly shifts from it'll be first person singular, it'll be first person plural, it'll be third person, and so it'll say Allah will talk like, Lo, I, Allah, hath saith unto you that we shall blah 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 blah, and He is not one to be trifled. And he's like, why? What is this? What is this? Why would you constantly switch your pronouns mid-sentence? But anyway, so that's the issue. And Anthony's pointing out Muslims come up with explanations for this, and it's like, when he uses this pronoun here in part of the verse, it's to emphasize this. But then when you get to this other part, he switches it to emphasize this other thing, and it's amazing. How could a human write this?
Yeah, and when you pay attention to the shifts, the problem is, it's not always clear if Allah is still referring to himself or someone else, because it's not very coherent the way it does it. It's not like you might find, a person can shift. He can speak of himself in the third person or first person, but the way the Quran does it is just wildly confusing.
Just jumps around.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So Halim is dealing with this, and one of the points that he makes is that there's no such thing as a plural of majesty in Arabic prior to the time that the Quran was written or contemporaneously with Muhammad.
Mm-hmm.
And then he further points out, even in the Quran, royalty doesn't speak in the plural. You don't see Pharaoh speaking that way or others. And so, at best, you can say that it's being introduced in the Quran. But then you need the Quran to inform you of that, and it never does that.
Doesn't.
And in fact, I've pointed out to people that if you look at the usage of the plural and the singular in the Quran, it doesn't have a consistent pattern. It's not like you can say when he speaks in the singular, it's emphasizing his majesty. When it speaks in the plural, it's emphasizing his mercy, as some Muslims have claimed. It's often the reverse. There's no consistency in the pattern. So the Quran doesn't disambiguate this. But here's why. So I brought up the Christians of Najran. The Christians of Najran heard from Muhammad's heralds. They're bringing down his revelations. They heard these things, so they go up to talk to Muhammad. And as they're talking to Muhammad, they ask him a series of questions. And one of the questions they ask is, if Allah is one and singular, why does he speak in the plural? Now, notice this. These are Arabs. They're Christians, but they're Arabs, right? Arabic is their language. It's not like these are foreigners, right? These are Arabic-speaking Christians. They know the Arabic just as well as Muhammad does. And they assume that the plurals mean plurality. And what right here where you'd expect Muhammad to say, oh, that's just this new thing that Allah coined that's called the plural of majesty. That's not what happens. In the Hadith and in the Sirah literature, Muhammad goes silent.
3:7. Yeah, and then he comes out with Surah 3, verse 7.
Yeah, where he basically says, there's some stuff that only Allah gets.
Yeah. In other words, I don't know. Only Allah knows.
Yeah. That's where this is funny. You didn't hear this. I mean, you heard me say it in the debate, but not the aftermath. I said, and I wasn't thinking of it as I wasn't thinking of it as an insult in the way it came out, though I'm fine with it coming out that way. But I said, Muhammad overheard Jews and Christians quoting God this way. He didn't understand what it meant, and he picked it up like a dog picks up fleas, and he ran with it, and then later got caught on it. And my point is, when a dog walks along in the grass, it gets fleas without realizing where it picked them up. And they took that as me saying, calling Muhammad or Allah a dog or something like that. And, I'm fine with that, but that wasn't the point there. I was just...
Anthony frequently doesn't understand the implications his words will have in certain environments.
But I'm usually happy. In fact, I know what you're referring to here mainly. So this is actually really funny. So David's alluding here to our first encounter with Sakari in San Diego. So I was there with vocab and others. And I was using language I've heard in my past that was just ordinary idioms, and I didn't realize their origin. But the guys I was talking to did, right? Like at one point, I kept asking a question, the guy kept dodging it, and I said, "Quit shucking and jiving." And this guy picked up on it and
the whole
called me
group
a racist.
did.
And I'm like, "What are you talking about? I'm just using a common idiom." But here's why it's funny, because that I don't know how long ago was that, like 7 years ago. So recently, when we were in San Diego again, as you know, Vocab and I and Louis
sat down for like a 4-hour discussion.
Yeah, we met with all those guys again. And so I'm thinking, how's this going to go? Because we were doing this behind closed doors. We were at their facility, and it's just 3 of us, and then there's like 15 to 20 of these guys, and who knows how many more on call. And some of them are coming in with big old knives on their side to meet the image of being Sakari, right? The Sakari, for those that don't know, were a group of like assassins trying to stir up rebellion and stuff in Israel, and they'd go through crowds and just stab people and slip away in the crowds. Well, so anyways, we're in there, and I'm waiting for the leader to come. He's the guy we're going to talk to, Taz. And Vocab, he comes in, he sees Vocab, and he says, "Hey, how's it going, Vocab?" And he hugs him. And I thought, wow, okay, this is going to go well. This is going to go well. And then he turns to me and he says, "I remember you. You're that," and he used some explicative. "You're that whatever." And I was like, okay, he didn't forget who I am.
That's what you get.
But after that, it was a really good discussion. But I thought it was funny because I didn't know if he would even remember me, and he called me some Some word I probably deserved.
Yeah, there you go. Let's see. Let's go through the rest of these. Wishing you a happy and holy Easter. Thank you, Tezbot. You're the background noise to my Easter feast after 40-day fasting. This better be a very good live stream. Also, I now officially have life in me. Nice. Nice. Yeah, we'll try to make it good, but it won't be on us. That'll be on Wes Huff. So if Wes Huff is good on Piers Morgan, then we'll all be good. Me and my fiance love watching your videos. Met y'all when you visited London. God bless you, Anthony. You are really smart and cool. Oh, hey, David.
His name says Shalom.
Nice. Where is the Kate Schumann? AP has night church Kate Schumann duties apparently at some point. Where is Cat Chow Man? Cat Chow Man.
What about
hey,
Cat Stevens?
Hey, I've recently been questioning a lot of my Protestant beliefs. See? That's on you, Anthony. And been drawn towards Eastern Orthodoxy more recently. I'm torn if I should leave, but I don't want to start over and lose everyone. All the Protestants will abandon you.
You want me to comment on that?
Well, yeah. Here's the thing, guys. Anthony, I'm kind of laid back. I pointed out I'm kind of Protestant by default because I haven't joined I haven't joined the Roman Catholic Church and haven't joined the Eastern Orthodox Church. And when they make a case for saying you have to join this church and this is the true church and so on, I'm not persuaded by the cases and so on. So I became a Christian reading a Bible, and so yeah, if you don't go beyond that and join a Catholic Church or Orthodox Church, you're kind of a Protestant by default. Even though I wasn't setting out to protest anything, I was just reading the Bible and stuff. So my Christian beliefs are based on the Bible. But apart from that, I'm kind of laid back on a bunch of things. And AP's going Eastern Orthodox. We always have people in the chat, Protestants, Catholics, Orthodox, and so on. We've talked. Matter of fact, Anthony, you could give like a short answer, and don't worry about hurting anyone's feelings. They hurt everyone's feelings all the time with their Orthodoxy is the true church. No, you have to follow the Pope, right? But give a short answer. But something AP and I've been talking about is like getting a representative from each of the main groups, and having each person say, okay, you've got an hour to lay out your case for Roman Catholicism. You've got an hour to lay out your case for the Orthodox Church. You've got an hour to lay out your case for Protestant Church, and then to get some interaction on that point, some responses and stuff, because there are lots of people who are interested in this topic and aren't sure what to do. But Anthony, you've got take about a minute or two to lay out your overarching thoughts on.
Yeah, that's far too brief, but let me say this. So, like you, I found myself in prison after a lifetime of crime. I was a criminal from my infancy. I was being brought home by the priest, by the police.
I was brought home by the Pope.
Well, actually, so I'm Sicilian, so I was born into a Sicilian family. I went to a Catholic school when I was younger, and got in all kinds of trouble there. But I got in trouble almost every day of my life. Every day I would go home with a grade. They would grade me every single day, my behavior, everything else, because I was so bad. I had a permanent seat in the principal's office. Got arrested a lot. When I went to prison, what really bothered me is I listened to other people make excuses for why they were there, trying to justify it. Some people would say I came from a broken home. And I'd think, oh, wait a minute, I didn't come from a broken home. And so I hear from that, I'm worse than this guy. And then I hear somebody else say, I came from a poor family. And I thought, well, we always had food, clothing, and shelter. There were ups and downs monetarily. I didn't do these things because I needed to. And I know in all these cases, I knew evil. People. Yeah, I knew people who did better in all these circumstances that they're talking about than I did, with better circumstances. And I just listened to one excuse after another, one after one, and I thought, there's just no explanation other than I'm just evil. And part of the thing that really, really got me too was that there was nothing that was going to stop any of that, because I loved it. I loved what I was doing. So that one of the main things that I did, besides being involved in gangs, is I stole cars. and I could fill up entire parking lots with all the cars I stole. I like stealing cars so much, I would take somebody's car from one driveway and park it next door. I got off on, I mean, I wasn't stealing it to take them to a chop shop to get money. I did it for the pure thrill of it. And I didn't even really do drugs until like the last 6 months of my criminal ways. And it was only because I started doing speed because I wanted to stay up longer so I could steal more cars in a night. And so, I mean, it was really bad. And so when I was in jail, I started reading the Bible. Providentially, it was a self-professed devil worshiper who was attacking the Bible who told me how to get one because he wanted to show me all these things. And I said, I don't believe that. And anyways, I got the Bible. I had nothing but time to read it. He couldn't show me what he thought he could. And I was terrified. I'm reading of a God who threw our first parents out of the garden simply for taking a piece of fruit. I'm reading of a God who destroyed mankind in a flood and only spared 8 people, and it says it was by grace. I'm reading of fire coming down out of heaven and consuming people and shooting out of his presence and consuming them. And I thought, I'm hopelessly undone. I have no hope. I didn't understand from reading the Bible. Here comes the 60-second part. I didn't understand just from reading the Bible, the gospel. I only understood my sinfulness and God's wrath, and that I was in a world of hurt. It wasn't until somebody preached the gospel to me that I heard what was to me wondrous good news. And that good news captivated me, and I could not possibly let it go for something else. The gospel that I came to believe is not the same thing I hear from Rome in the East. I'm not saying there's nobody in those contexts who believe what I believe, but it would be in spite of the official teachings. What the gospel that came to me said very clearly is that Christ died in my place. He bore the punishment that I deserved, and he lived a perfect life prior to that, and that's the life that he offered up on the cross, and in turn is reckoned to my account. I am accounted before God as though I am righteous because of Christ. Now, that doesn't mean that I don't strive to be holy, but that is a further work of Christ in me. It's not what he did to ultimately secure my forgiveness and my standing with God. That's something he's doing in me as I make my way to heaven. So I just don't hear that same clear gospel in other contexts. And so I just, for the life of me, couldn't possibly be attracted to something that waters that down or pollutes it with anything else.
It's interesting. You mentioned how you realized that you're a sinner because none of the explanations for why someone would do stuff made sense apart from you just have an inclination to do evil stuff. But that's similar to Augustine's pear tree story. So for everyone who's not familiar with Augustine's pear tree story, this is in the Confessions of Augustine. But he says, he talks about all this other messed up stuff he did. He's done all sorts of messed up stuff, but there was one that kind of stuck out in his mind. And even decades later when he's writing, and lots of other people read this and like, what? You guys stole some pears. What? Who cares? You guys were teenagers and you stole some pears. So he has this story that him and his buddies were into some mischief and stuff. And one day they're walking by a neighbor's pear tree and they're like, hey, let's shake the pears out of this tree. And so they shake the pears out of this tree and then they're just going to like give them to some pigs and stuff. And they're just cracking up laughing about stealing their neighbor's pears. But this really bothered Augustine later. He's like, why? I wasn't poor. I could buy a pear if I wanted to. I didn't need the pear. We weren't even getting them to eat. We're getting them. And he goes through all the possible reasons that someone might commit a crime. It's like, someone might kill someone for out of anger, or to take the person's wife, or to take his goods, or something like this. He goes through all the reasons someone might commit a crime or do something. He's like, none of that applied. I didn't need it. I didn't want it. We just did it because it was fun to do something bad. And this sort of thinking on this process actually leads him to realize that he's got a problem with sin, and led him to believe what kind of being he is. Anyway, I'm new to this, but could they be confirming the Gnostic Gospels? No. Are you talking about the Quran? What the Quran says? Could the Quran be confirming the Gnostic Gospels? No. And that's another fun thing. If a Muslim ever says, "Oh, it's not that gospel, it's this other," great. Find a gospel anywhere that lines up with Islam. Pick one anywhere. I don't care. First century gospel, so those would be the ones in the New Testament. Later Gnostic gospels, pick anyone. Find me one on the planet, anywhere in history that lines up with Islam. There isn't one. But the bottom line is the Quran is talking to Christians. It's addressing Christians, telling us to live by the teachings of the gospel. And that's not the Gnostic gospels. But if you wanted to say that, if you want to say, yes, he's telling you to live by the Gnostic Gospels, great, then we definitely have to reject Islam. AP is looking different these days, yes. Less Turkish. Bart Ehrman, he was never a real atheist. It's a psyop. That's why he doesn't find the Trinity confusing, you see. This is all good point here. Can't use my name says, I'm Nigerian, 30 years old. I have a Christian girl I want to marry, but my parents are against it because she's from a different tribe. Nigerian, don't have a degree. And then let's see. Her parents don't live close enough that they can do a background check, and she is older than I am. Whose decision should it be? What do you advise? P.S. You two have been great influences. Thank you. This sounds like a cultural thing in Nigeria, so we wouldn't be able to comment on this. There are different things are appropriate and inappropriate in different cultures. Like here in the United States, if I wanted to marry a woman, it would be on her, and it kind of wouldn't matter. I mean, you definitely want the parents to be on board and so on, but at the end of the day, if she wants to get married and her parents don't, then she would just get married anyway. And keep in mind, I'm not talking about all America. I'm just saying in America, that would be pretty common. It's the woman who gets to decide who she's married, and her parents are, again, you want the parents' acceptance and stuff, but wouldn't necessarily be required. But in Nigeria, it might be a much bigger issue. So I wouldn't be comfortable telling you what to do in a completely different cultural context where my advice might be completely wrong. Would you agree with that, Anthony, or?
Yeah,
that we would not be appropriate people to ask about a Nigerian context.
Yeah, I mean, there's all sorts of issues regarding familial relations and stuff like that we don't even really have a mindset for. Yeah,
so sorry about that, but we know we have other Nigerians who watch and so on, so it might be better to ask them. Allah's preferred pronouns are I, we, and he. Yes, and all the other ones. Pair character, that's a super sticker, thank you. And Chloe says, my indulgences for you doctors. Happy Easter. Thank you, Chloe. Today I got to share the gospel with a Muslim. At the end of our talk, he still had questions, but he believes Jesus is Lord and he died for his sins and rose again. He's going to start coming to church. Yeah, that is some awesome progress. It's like you're saying he's still got questions. I don't think, oh, I bet he's got questions. You're like, oh, but he grants all the major issues. Oh, well, good. That's good to have. It's good if you still have questions on other stuff, but if you got the good foundation down, awesome stuff. 1, Aisha is mommy of all moments. 2, Abu Bakr was moment. Get that? So Aisha is mother of the believers, but Abu Bakr was a believer. So Aisha is Abu Bakr's mother. But Muhammad's a believer too. So Muhammad married his own mother. Get that funny little stuff there. Need Rogers to go live tomorrow so he can say, post tenebris lux. With some extra meaning, we serve a living God, unlike the God of the Quran.
Indeed.
We may be going live tomorrow, but AP, if AP doesn't have something in the evening, then AP will probably want to go live. But if AP is not going live, then Anthony and I will probably continue our stuff because we got a bunch of cool stuff from his debate and from this interview we're about to go through. Shout out to Richard. Keep on serving the Lord. I cannot wait to meet you all in the precious Lord's kingdom someday. Blessed is the risen King Jesus. Who's Richard?
Shout out to Richard. I don't know.
Who's Richard? Okay, we're assuming Richard heard you. I'm driving to an Orthodox church for
Pascha.
Do they call it that? They call it Pascha, and not what do they call it?
Yeah, that's just an alternative name for it.
No, I know that, but I'm just saying, is that like official? Like they call it Pascha and not Easter?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, it's just as Pascha or Resurrection Sunday.
Okay, that's cool.
Wonder is that? Yeah,
that's Easter. I was just wondering if that's an Eastern Orthodox like official.
It's not exclusive to them, but they do use that term.
No, I just meant like if that is the standard, because I I had no idea. Would you rather have a 30-second conversation with God himself and have any one question answered, or have a 5-minute interview with an actual angel, get many questions answered? I'd go with God.
You want an interview with God? Depends what kind of interview this is.
Yeah.
Probably not the one that Job had.
If you're saying any one question answered, it'd be kind of messed up. Could be like, hey, what stock is going to blow up next year? Like, what are the lottery numbers next week? Mosh Cohen says, did you get a chance to see the pictures from Jerusalem? A lot of Christians went on X to say the Jews aren't letting us in when it's literally full. Really? Hey, Mosh, send me something that might be funny to share, like on X or something. The moment the Jewish state put out a more Christian message for Easter than the head of the Church of England was today. That's interesting. I'll have to check that out. Yeah, guys, so, I woke up like 4:30 or something like that in the afternoon, and then had to finish my brisket. Then I started cooking the brisket 3 o'clock in the morning, 3 o'clock a.m. Then got that going for a while, then went to sleep, woke up in the afternoon. Brisket was done. You got to slow cook a brisket, ladies and gentlemen. But the point is, I haven't followed anything that's been going on today. Someone was saying, telling me to check out Trump's Easter message and so on. David, just wanted to thank you for your recommendation of Raymond Ibrahim's work on the Crusades for my paper. It's been very helpful for my research. Yes, Raymond Ibrahim has awesome stuff. Unfortunately, every single one of them is American. This is a new Christian wave in America and quite scary. When did Christians become so easily manipulated? Yeah, talking about the Christians who say Jews won't let them in. Jews won't let Christians in. Yeah, did not seem like that when I was in Israel. So whatever disagreements you want to have with Jews in Israel, something like that, it doesn't seem like they're keeping you out of any Easter stuff. So, wait, who just messaged me? Someone messaged me and said, yes, Eastern Orthodox call it Pascha. They don't call it Easter. Interesting. Okay, now I know. People always scold Andrew Tate. What about Ted Bundy? I bet Sam Shamoon will make a video about your opinion regarding Protestantism, Catholicism, and Eastern Orthodoxy. Well, that's good for him. Anthony, can you expand on which official Catholic teachings water down the gospel that you mentioned? I am Catholic and I do not know of any teaching. Okay, Anthony, this is not the purpose of the show, but if you wanted to give a highlight of stuff that we may discuss in the future.
Yeah, so the way I put it, just to be very clear, I mean, you can argue with me as any Catholic would that you're believing what the scriptures teach on the gospel, what the early Christians taught and so forth, and that's all well and good. What I'm telling you is that gospel's not sufficient to save somebody like me. I am utterly convinced at the core of my being that my only hope is that Christ died in my stead. I have no hope or plea before God other than him. It's not my merit. It's not the merit of saints. It's not any act of supererogation on their part that can be given to me that will do it. No creature is sufficient, to supplement my works or whatever. At the end of the day, there's no other gospel that will save this soul than the gospel that Christ died for me. My sins were entirely paid for by him. And it's only his active obedience to the will of God that is imputed to my account that gives me a title to heaven. That is my only hope. To the extent that Rome's gospel is other than that, to that extent, it not only waters it down, but vitiates it and altogether undermines it. Again, I don't say that all Catholics are necessarily believing something that's not the true gospel, but I think that it is less likely in a context where it's not preached and is in many ways, hidden or denied. But I can't believe anything that just isn't sufficient. It's like to me, it's like the Hebrew Israelites trying to persuade me to believe that all who don't fit into the racial categories that they have are necessarily going to be doomed and damned. I mean, what hope do they really have of persuading people that aren't of their ethnic acceptance, what groups are accepted by them? Are you going to possibly persuade somebody that doesn't fit into that to believe your message? That's just not going to work. There's only one gospel that can save this soul. Okay, so
And so I just wanted to point out that there's something that Anthony just said that I can verify. It's that he is by nature a really terrible person, and so there would be no hope for someone like Anthony, apart from unmerited favor. Chloe says, "Look, Dr. Anthony has more books behind him. His hikmah is huge, bigger than D Wood. You see." Yeah, I have space where you can actually see the curtains, and Anthony's is just books cover everything. So he's definitely got more hikmah. Pascha is Greek, Passover, and most Romance languages use a derivation of it. Yeah, I was mainly just wondering if they use Easter, or is that standard? Because I always see it, and as Anthony pointed out, other people use it and stuff like that. Pascha, yes. All those very weird rituals in Orthodox Eastern Church, such as hair cutting, spitting, etc. Comments. I'm Protestant now, thank God. We will, yeah. We'll wait for an Eastern Orthodox person to break down something if there's anything that seems weird, and then we'll find out if it's actually real, and then if it seems weird, what's the explanation for it? Protestants, Catholics, and Orthodox call it Pascuas in Spanish. That's interesting. All right, guys. All right. We've been here for a while already. Anthony has talked us to death, and we have yet to get into the actual interview here. guys, if you see a hardcore Reformed Protestant here, and you start saying, "What about the Catholic Church? You have to know it's my church." I mean, if you're asking, I hope you don't get upset with your answer, because you don't have to ask. Keep in mind, you don't have to ask. You don't have to. if you're asking, then I'll let him answer. But anyway, all right. So let's go ahead and jump into this video. This is Wes Huff on Piers Morgan. Very interesting. Again, wasn't planning on going live this weekend. Just going to have Easter weekend with family and so on, but would be kind of weird to go through this Easter video from Piers Morgan after Easter when we're still during Easter. So we're going to check some of this out now.
Easter is almost upon us, and it's a time of renewal and optimism for millions around the world. Even atheists generally get to enjoy better weather after a long winter, and many people get a day off work. For Christians, though, it's one of the most important times of the year, based on faith. But how much of that faith is based on historical evidence? Well, Wesley Huff is a biblical scholar and historian. His use of historical reasoning and deep research to underpin Christian faith has captivated millions around the world. And he joins me on Uncensored now. Well, Wesley, great to have you on Uncensored.
Hey, you familiar with Wes Huff, Anthony?
Yeah, a little bit.
Were you familiar with him before he really blew up recently?
I think I saw maybe something here and there, but I didn't. I didn't search out more stuff from him. I did see that Billy Carson guy, but it was funny because I saw him a couple times and I thought this guy has got to be some kind of weird joke that's being played on the world. Yeah, like I don't know where I saw him. It was on one of these. I would only.
I never saw him. I only saw him after everyone started talking about the Wes Huff Billy Carson debate, and I had no clue who either of them was. That's not saying anything about either one of them. I'm not good with names, and I forget them very quickly. And so even if I'd seen something like 2 years ago or something like that, I wouldn't remember it. So I had zero clue who either one of them were. And then eventually we started checking some of it out. And yeah, he crushed him. But I have to say, it is awesome because right after that, I mean, Wes Huff became a rock star. So he debates this guy I never heard of, but it was there were so many people who were worried and upset about what this guy was saying that when someone just completely crushed him, everyone was loving it. And then he just became this, again, like a apologetics, Christian historian rock star, where he's going around. He's on Joe Rogan. I think he was on PBD, and now he's on Piers Morgan and stuff like that. It's like, man, this is a cool year. Anyway, awesome stuff. But go ahead.
Yeah. So I saw it. I was thinking about this the other day. You can learn something, even a lot about something, but when you don't know everything about it, sometimes somebody will say something and you don't just jump and pounce on it because you're thinking maybe that's something in that area of stuff on this topic I don't know, right? So, for example, I've had several years of Hebrew and Greek and so forth. but I wouldn't claim to know everything about the languages. I don't know every word in the English language. So sometimes somebody will use a word, let's say, and I think that doesn't sound like a word to me, and I go look it up, and there it is. Well, I heard Billy Carson the few times I heard him a couple times, and I thought, man, that just sounds bizarre. But I had to go look it up because I'm thinking, is he just saying something that I haven't heard of before? And I look it up, and it's just plain bizarre, right? It's just not there at all. And so, anyways, when Wes Huff called him, for example, he kept using the phrase Sinai Bible, and I was, I'm quite familiar with Sinaiticus, but when he kept saying Sinai Bible, I'm thinking,
I thought some other Bible.
Yeah, I'm like, what is he talking about?
So
There's something out there.
That's why I was actually, I was thinking, is this like some version or some other Bible or something like this? And he's saying that it denies the crucifixion and stuff. And I'm like, and so hats off to Wes for being able to get to the bottom of that, and then and then no, I meant God. Wait, so he's saying Sinai Bible. Wes gets him to say, okay, are you saying Sinat? Are you trying to say Codex Sinaiticus? Is that what you're saying? Oh, yeah, that's what I mean. Okay, well, that doesn't deny the crucifixion. The crucifixion is all over the place, as it is in all Bible manuscripts. Oh, yeah, I meant Gospel of Barnabas. Gospel of Barnabas was written like over 1,000 years after the time of Jesus.
Oh, come on. They sound the same.
Yeah.
It's an easy mistake.
So anyway, after that, Wes really took off, and awesome times. And now he's on Piers Morgan for Easter weekend talking about the resurrection.
Yeah, great to be here. Thank you for having me, Piers.
I watched your fascinating chat with Joe Rogan, and it was really interesting to me because I have lots of arguments on this show with atheists like Richard Dawkins, and it all comes down to they don't believe there's anything like God. I happen to believe there is. I'm a Catholic, was raised a Catholic.
Ooh. Why don't you have Anthony on your show, Piers?
And then we get round to the Big Bang, and we get round to, well, what was there before the Big Bang? And they can never answer me. And I get, well, that's exactly why I think there's a superior entity out there, because the human brain cannot tell me what nothing is. So that's where I come from on this. I'm a believer, and this is a special time, obviously, for Catholics, as it is for all Christians. But I'm also somebody that often gets frustrated that the atheist end of the argument often try and decry everything in the Bible, for example, in the New Testament, as all obviously nonsense. And what's interesting about your perspective on this, from your history and your studying, is that you believe a lot of the New Testament is unarguably factually true.
I do, yeah.
Yeah. It's funny because it's weird. Pierce sometimes makes really good points. Sometimes he makes the dumbest points I've ever heard of in my entire life. Here he's making... He just made a very important point, guys, that you've got the sort of online critics, the online atheists and stuff like that, and they'll say, okay, I don't believe that the Bible is the inspired word of God. Therefore, I reject all of it, and it's all false or something like that. And you can't quote it to me and so on. It's like, do you not realize how insanely stupid that is? Here's the thing. If you reject the Bible as the inspired word of God, it doesn't become something that's just completely false. I mean, the Bible says that Tiberius was the Roman emperor during the time of Jesus. You're going to say Tiberius wasn't the emperor during the time of Jesus? Is that what you're going to say? Since the Bible says it, it must be false? That would be stupid. Here's the thing. If you say, I don't believe in the inspiration of Scripture, great. Then you just have a bunch of ancient sources. You have a bunch of ancient documents, and you'd still have to deal with what they're saying. So let me put it this way. I don't believe that the Quran is inspired. I believe you can learn all kinds of things using it as a historical source. You can learn all kinds of things. Same with the Hadith. I don't believe the Hadith are inspired or that they even have a good a good historical methodology. I believe you can learn all sorts of things about history from the Hadith. And so guess what? If you don't believe that Matthew, Mark, Luke, John, Acts, Romans, and so on are the inspired word of God, what would they be? They'd be a bunch of early Christian documents that people wrote down and are giving you information about what was going on and what was believed at the time. And so atheists who just, I don't believe it's the word, so it's all false and Jesus never existed. You sound like idiots. You sound like complete idiots. I'm just going to be honest. We'll see if, now sadly, Wes is a bit nicer than I am, so he's not going to say you sound like a bunch of idiots, but let's see if he gets.
And I think that's demonstrable from the actual evidence that we can look at through time and space, with the Bible talking about real people in real times and real places.
Is it indisputable to you that Jesus Christ existed, for example?
Oh, definitely so. I think we can say pretty unequivocally that a character, a first century Jewish itinerant rabbi by the name of Jesus of Nazareth, did walk the dusty streets of first century Roman occupied Judea. I think that even the most skeptical scholars will grant that if we know very little about Jesus, we know that he did exist and that he was crucified in and around the beginning of the first century under the overseeing of the governor of Judea, Pontius Pilate.
I want to play.
Pause right there, guys, because there are always the Jesus mythers. Just wanted to point out certain beliefs are common at the internet level that would be laughed out of the room at the scholarly level. Those of you who, I saw a video and it said Jesus never existed. You see, Jesus never existed. This is the proof. You sound like a complete moron to, no, I'm not saying to me. I mean, yeah, you do sound like a moron to me, but you also sound like a moron to even atheists and agnostic scholars. And it's famous. There's a famous clip by Bart Ehrman where someone brought this up during the Q&A with Bart Ehrman. And yeah, he said basically, I understand that the crowds you run with, that might be an acceptable view. He goes, no one in the circles I run with take that seriously at all. No one. And he's talking about the scholarly level. And he's talking about atheists and critical scholars. They would laugh you out of the room. You said some stuff like that. Why? Guys, we can trace this stuff back to very, very early. We can trace this stuff back. You think, you got all these dopes who think, oh, this was written centuries later and stuff like that. You guys sound like morons. We can trust belief in Jesus' death, resurrection, and deity to within 2 years, right? To within 2 years. You got the 1 Corinthians Creed. Scholars date that to within 2 years. It talks about Jesus' death, his resurrection, appearances to multiple people. Belief in Jesus' deity, you can trace that back to within 2 years of Jesus' crucifixion. How? The Apostle Paul is going on a rampage. Paul converts to Christianity a couple of years after the crucifixion. So when he's persecuting the church, it's within that first 2 years. What enrages Paul? What sets him off? He tells us Christians were calling on the name of Jesus. Why is that relevant? Old Testament, you call on the name of Yahweh, and Christians are calling on the name of Jesus. This is what sets him off. What's that mean? If Paul is declaring war on the Christian church, and we know it's within the first 2 years, because after that, Paul's a Christian, and he's calling on the name of the Lord Jesus. What's that mean? It means that Paul was set off by Christians treating Jesus like Yahweh in the first 2 years. What's that mean? It means the earliest Christian church is doing this. The earliest Christian church was teaching this. So all the beliefs that you guys think came decades or centuries later, they're right there at the beginning. They're right there at the beginning. And so the idea that, oh, none of this happened is all made up, they just invented this. You sound really stupid. You sound really stupid, and you don't seem to care. That's the problem. You have any thoughts on that, Anthony, before we continue here?
Yeah, really quickly, the expression calling upon the name of the Lord is found as far back as Genesis 4, referring to the line of Seth and identifying them as the true worshipers of God. It says, in his days, men began to call upon the name of the Lord. And thereafter, it's a constant refrain. It's used scores and scores and scores of times in the Torah, in the prophets, and especially in the Psalms. And one of the climactic verses is Joel 2, where it says, all who call upon the name of the Lord will be saved. This is what Paul cites in Romans 10 when he's talking about confessing with your mouth the Lord Jesus, believing in your heart that God raised him from the dead. Happy Easter. He's quoting this text from Joel, but he's applying it to Jesus. And then he also, in 1 Corinthians 1, uses this as though it's the very definition of what a Christian is. He's writing to the church in Corinth, and he says, to all those who in every place call upon the name of the Lord Jesus, their Lord and ours. So the twist of Paul is that he further identifies the Lord as Jesus, right? And as you're saying, he's enraged at Stephen in Acts 7, who's calling upon the name of Jesus, and then Jesus appears to him, and the words from Paul's mouth are, who are you, Lord? He recognizes this is the Lord, but wait, I kind of missed who this is. And then after that, when he gets baptized by Ananias, it says that he was calling upon the name of the Lord, right? I mean, this just courses through the apostolic writing. And notice that's not just Paul, because Acts is recording this. Paul's saying it, right? Peter quotes the same text as Paul from Joel 2 and Acts 2. I mean, it's just, this is Christianity from day one, and it's what Paul is trading everything for. He's willing to give up everything he had in Judaism for this.
I would just say, ladies and gentlemen, for you atheists and so on, I understand there are different kinds of atheists. There are friendly atheists. There are more hostile atheists. Even among hostile atheists, you've got the hostile and aggressive atheists who sincerely want to investigate these things, and those who just kind of want to mock and so on. For anyone who's actually sincere, for anyone who wants to, even if you're rejecting Christianity, if you want to at least be accurate, you have to deal with the fact that this goes back to the earliest level of Christianity. And so here's the thing. Here's what you have to wrestle with. You had a bunch of first century Jews who start calling on the name of Jesus the way they are commanded to call on the name of Yahweh. Other Jews look at this and they say, this is bad. This is really, really bad here. You are not supposed to do this. So, but here's the question. What made those earliest Christians believe that? Because it would kind of have to be something big, right? Saying the carpenter from Nazareth, the guy who built your cousin's table or something like that, saying that guy, we're calling on that guy after he's crucified by the Romans. After this guy's crucified by the Romans, we're going to call on that guy's name as God and pray to him. Something had to convince them to do that. And so you'd have to say, one, what was Jesus saying that gave them these ideas? And two, what happened to confirm that so that they actually say, oh, and we know that he spoke the truth. Because normally if you get crucified, that would be kind of, okay, you're done. Something happened. Guess what? The resurrection would account for that. But notice you have the exact same thing with the Apostle Paul. Paul declares war on that, so he's hostile to it. And then Paul becomes one of its biggest early defenders. And so what happened to Paul? Well, we have an account. If you have a better explanation, by all means, please share it. But we have Paul's explanation, which is he got knocked off his horse and cried out, "Who are you, Lord?" And the Lord said, "I'm Jesus." And this influences Paul. So my point here is, if you are a skeptic, an atheist, a critic, whatever, and you want to at least be in line with history and not sound like a moron, you have to take account of those kinds of things and then explain what happened. If you want to explain Christianity, you got to explain those kinds of things. Or you're straw manning everything. You did have this question. Will Anthony Rogers debate Jay Dyer? Will be interesting. Is that something in the mix, or Vlad is just suggesting that?
Vlad the Impaler. I like the name.
Vlad the Impala. Baller.
Rogers will debate anybody except those who have, for other reasons, disqualified themselves by their constant lying and backing out of debates that were already scheduled. But yeah, I mean, I'm willing to debate anybody on any topic, especially the gospel.
And guys, I just have to say,
when I say any topic, I mean it has to be worth debating.
Just something significant. Something significant. I have to say, guys, Anthony is a machine. He is a massively better debater than I am, and definitely in the top couple of Christian debaters out there. And on the topics he deals with, that he's been dealing with, probably the best that I'm familiar with. All right, back to this. What's up?
I was going to say real quick, what's I think not often mentioned, but I think is huge, is the shift of worship from Saturday to Sunday. Because remember, if you look at the prophets, when they talk about why Israel was going to be sent into exile, one of the main reasons that comes up over and over again is because they weren't observing the Sabbath. And of course, there's a whole bunch of other things that go along with this. But this means that for the Jews, it was drilled into them. You better not break the Sabbath. That's why when you get to the New Testament, a lot of the controversies surrounding Jesus are Sabbath controversies. They're really upset with what Jesus is doing on the Sabbath, more than they ever were prior to that in their history, right? They go into exile because they're not keeping the Sabbath. And so the Jews at this time are so worried about breaking the Sabbath that they fence it off with all these rules. And so that's what you're seeing in the New Testament. Well, what's going to get a group of Jews to suddenly start worshiping on Sunday after they were kicked out of their country, lost everything, and subjected by foreign rulers. I mean, how are these people ever going to just swap days and think nothing of it? And there's no question that they did. Obviously, the apostles do continue to go to synagogues, for example, on Saturday. They're going there primarily, though, to witness to the Jews. But when you see distinctively Christian gatherings like 1 Corinthians 16, Acts 20, other texts show that the Christians are gathering on Sunday, the Lord's Day. This is huge. It's huge. Something significant not only happened in the first century, like David was talking about, obviously pointing to the resurrection, but something significant happened on Sunday in order for these guys to switch their day of worship.
Yeah. So I guess you put it all together, guys. You have all these elements that we know about the early church. And then the question is, okay, whatever your explanation is, it has to account for how Christians ended up doing these things and believing these things. You have to come up with an explanation of that. Christians have their explanation for that. Jesus is making claims. Jesus died. Jesus rose from the dead and appeared to them. That accounts for these things. Jesus appeared to Paul. That explains everything. If you have an alternative explanation that doesn't involve Jesus dying on the cross, rising from the dead, appearing to his followers, appearing to Paul, if you have another explanation, we'd be happy to hear it. But as long as you're just running around going, "Oh, Jesus never existed," it's impossible to take you seriously.
A clip from one of my friends, Jordan Peterson, who's very skeptical about all this, and he said this.
Profound religious account is bottomless. Mm-hmm. And the biblical representations are like that. There's no limit to the amount of investigation they can bear, not least because the text itself is deeply cross-referenced. So there's an innumerable number of paths through it. It's like a chessboard. And so it's inexhaustible in its interpretive space.
That's true.
What do you say to that, Wesley?
What was he talking about? Scripture there? He's saying scripture is like inexhaustible and like its meaning and layers of meaning or something like that. I think that's what he's saying.
That's what I thought.
Yeah.
Wasn't entirely clear though.
Okay, so I think what Piers is saying is Jordan Peterson believes that there are all these layers of meaning and so on, and this depth and so on, whereas you, Wes, you're treating it like historical record. So I think I'm not entirely sure, but I think that's where he's going. But let's
Yeah, it's interesting, Piers. I really appreciate Jordan Peterson and kind of the angle that he reveals on the biblical text and some of the kind of allegorical perspectives that it reveals. I don't deny that in the least. In fact, I think I've found Peterson very helpful in his Jungian approach in drawing some of those things out, whereas maybe prior to finding Jordan Peterson, I might have dismissed them in a way that I think was probably too soon to do so. However, I think two things can be true at the exact same time, Piers. I think we can grant that there is meaning that goes beyond the text, but not deny that there were actual events that took place, that people like Jordan Peterson talk about from the biblical narratives, individuals at the core, like Jesus Christ, actually existed, actually walked this world, did predict his own death and resurrection. And then if you could have a camera running on the tomb in and around 33 AD, that an actual Jesus would have walked out on the third day after his crucifixion and burial.
Hey, that's actually funny because if people didn't see Alex O'Connor's interview with Jordan Peterson, they won't know what Wes is talking about right there. So Wes says, yes, you can have all these layers of meaning and allegory and so on, but if you had a camera sitting in front of the tomb, Jesus also walked out. Jordan Peterson said that when Alex was sort of pressuring him, saying, okay, you're saying this stuff, you take this stuff as true, but like what's true in a psychological sense, true in a sense of meaning, it has meaning. And he kept pressing him over and over and over again, and hats off to him for finding, because lots of other people tried to get Jordan Peterson to clarify, what do you believe actually happened? What do you actually believe happened? Not just what's the meaning or what's the takeaways. What do you believe actually happened? Finally said, okay, if you went back, you put a camera in front of the tomb, is Jesus going to walk out? Did that happen? And Jordan Peterson said, yeah, he does think that Jesus walked out of the tomb. And so it was like, oh, awesome. So I think Wes brought that up without saying that's what Jordan Peterson said in that discussion. But he brought that up to say, basically, Jordan Peterson is on the same page. He's focusing on the meaning and the psychology of these things and so on. But there are definitely elements where he says, yeah, and Christians are right about this being a historical event. So it's cool stuff.
That is the crux of this, isn't it? Is that whether Jesus of Nazareth was resurrected really goes to the absolute essence and heart of Christianity, because obviously if he was, then that is a miracle. And then everyone that believes in Christianity and what it all stands for and Jesus and everything would feel validated by the fact, well, how else do you explain it? So it's at the crux of it. From the text of the New Testament, then, where is the actual hard evidence for you as an historian that actually happened?
Yeah, I think we do, Piers, have a historical question in terms of we have an actual character who we can demonstrate that lived, and then we have that same character being demonstrated in multiple independent and cross-reference sources, chief of which we call the Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. But just because those are religious texts now doesn't necessarily negate that they are historical texts. These were...
Yeah, just wanted to point it out, just because most people don't know this. The genre, it's called the genre. What kind of books are the Gospels? What are they writing? What are people sitting down and writing? Because atheists will think, oh, they're just writing down legends. It's like on the level of Aesop's fables or something like that. No, the genre is first century Greco-Roman biography. That's how you write a biography in the first century Greco-Roman culture. And so that's what they're trying to do. They're trying to write biographies. Yes, we Christians now regard them as the inspired word of God. At the very least, you have to deal with the fact that these guys are trying and claiming to write biographies of Jesus. That, keep in mind, you could believe they're wrong about things or that they're making things up or something like that. But understand, you have multiple first century biographical sources. And then the question becomes, where did these ideas come from? And just going, Jesus never existed. You're not helping anything. You're not helping anything. You're embarrassing yourself. Stop it.
Independent written sources that come from the time frame. If we want to know about someone from the ancient world or history in general, we go to the earliest sources, preferably eyewitness sources. And I think that's what we have within the Gospels. So we have a character who lived, who died, and then a character who was said by an early Jesus community to have been resurrected. And the accounts of that are not just kind of scant. They're not seeing Jesus off from afar as some sort of apparition or something like that. What we have is the case of instances of the early Jesus community saying they walked with him, they talked with him, they ate with him. And this happened over the course of, as Luke in his combination, the Gospel of Luke and Acts, says over the course of 40 days. This wasn't a short event. And so there were as many as, Paul says, up to 500 witnesses who took part in this event before his ultimate, resurrecting, going to the ascension of the right hand of the Father. And so it's a historical question, Piers, in the sense that we have to account for what is the best inference to the explanation of this particular thing happening. And I would contend that given the historical data that we can look at, I don't think it's out of the realm of possibility to explain this from a historical perspective, and that when we do so and we look at the independent testimonies that all intersect on this particular event, we actually, the best explanation to that is that this event actually did take place.
That actually connects with what I was saying, guys. If you have all these facts that we know, so you got first century books that are claiming to be biographies. We know that belief in Jesus' death and resurrection and appearances, all that goes back to the earliest Aramaic-speaking church. Belief in Jesus' deity goes back to the earliest Aramaic-speaking church. And what he just pointed out is you have to take what you know and then make an inference to the best explanation. What is the best explanation for why we have this here? What's the best explanation? Because I would say Jesus was making some amazing claims about himself, and he rose from the dead and appeared to them. That accounts for everything. That accounts for the early Christian belief. That accounts for the Apostle Paul. That accounts for everything. Once again, if you have a better explanation, love to see it. But, well, Jesus never existed and the gospel's written in the 5th century. Just ain't it. You sound really, really dumb when you say stuff like that.
The counter argument is that Paul the Apostle wasn't there for the resurrection himself, and there's no other reference really, other than I think the 1 Corinthians chapter 15. There's only one other reference to the fact that 500 people witnessed this. Does any of that, in your eyes, put more doubt on it?
Interesting question there, Anthony. So he's basically saying, hey, so Paul in 1 Corinthians 15 is our only source on the appearance to the 500. And therefore, I'm trying to think of a way for this objection to make sense. So basically the objection is, hey, it's only Paul that says it. We don't have that anywhere else. So can you really trust it? But my view would be, yeah, the Apostle Paul is saying it to the early church. And he's saying that you could still talk to these people. So it'd be very, very weird of me to say, oh, guys, hey, you know the thing that just happened? Yeah, I got 500 witnesses here, and no one actually knows what I'm talking about, or no one knows any of this stuff about witnesses and so on. So, guys, yeah, looking at it from 2,000 years later, it's easy to go, oh, you know, Paul says there are 500 witnesses, but how do we know? Yeah, but Paul is writing that to an early church, and it's part of a creed that goes back to the Aramaic church. And so it's kind of weird to just say he's just making something up in that environment and getting away with it.
Yeah, you know, also, I don't quite know what he means by saying Paul wasn't a witness. Certainly, Paul's Damascus Road experience is the equivalent underwriting Paul's apostolic office that was the case in the for the other apostles.
And he says in Corinthians, have I not seen Jesus our Lord?
Jesus our Lord. Yeah, you know, what I was going to point out, though, is I think what some people mean when they say this, and maybe Piers has sort of mixed this up a little bit, is sometimes they say he wasn't a witness to Jesus. He didn't know Jesus before. He wasn't a witness to his ministry and so forth. But what's interesting is, you know, that's taken for granted by a lot of people, but there's some significant pushback against that. Pauline scholar Stanley Porter, also a Greek grammarian, I mean, he's a heavyweight scholar, has written a whole heap of things on Paul, and he contends that this should be challenged, that Paul didn't know Jesus. One of the points that he makes is Paul was an up-and-coming Pharisee, and he was a rambunctious one at that, very zealous. The idea that Jesus is going up to Jerusalem, causing a stir, and even outside of Jerusalem, the Pharisees are sending delegations to inquire into things. They send a delegation to John to ask him who he is, and of course they're hounding Jesus. It may be even possible, Porter saying that Paul was among some of those groups. But in any case, certainly in Jerusalem, when Jesus goes there, you can be sure Paul would be pushing his way through the crowd to see Jesus. You know, his hostility to the early Christians didn't come out of nowhere. There was something in the background of this. But then he actually points to a number of texts. I'll just read one that's interesting when you think of it in light of this question. Paul says in 2 Corinthians 5, he says, "Therefore, from now on we recognize no one according to the flesh, even though we have known Christ according to the flesh, yet now we know him in this way no longer." So he's speaking of some prior way of knowing Christ that's now different after the resurrection and so forth. Porter thinks this is one of those verses that proves Paul did know Jesus from before. But
also interesting about Paul, for those who would be skeptical of historical information he's sharing, also important that Paul, he receives revelations. He receives revelations about what he's to preach. But according to Galatians, he actually goes and confirms with the apostles, because this is a guy who believed that Satan can transform himself into an angel of light. And so this is a message for all you fans of Muhammad out there. Guess what? Someone can believe he's getting revelations and they're actually not coming from God. That can happen. Paul knew that. Muhammad is apparently too dumb to realize that. But Paul eventually goes up to the church in Jerusalem to verify that what he had received by revelation lines up with what they gathered from learning from Jesus for all these years. He says, and the apostles gave him the right hand of fellowship, so they agreed with him. Point is, the guy seems pretty careful. As a Pharisee, he would have been obsessed with accurately transmitting traditions from the rabbis and so on. When he becomes a Christian, he transfers that to the apostles. I want to verify that I'm transmitting reliable information from the apostles here and so on. So he seems like a very careful dude. Doesn't seem like, oh, let's make up a bunch of stuff about 500 people. Duh. Anyway, here we go.
I don't think so, because I think when we look at something that we can try to historiographically explain, we look at the various explanations and then we account for the data. So you're correct in the sense that 1 Corinthians 15 is the only place that's mentioned where we talk about these 500 witnesses who saw Jesus all at once. However, when you corroborate those with the accounts that we find particularly in Matthew, Luke, and John, I think it does explain, especially when you have the instance at the ascension in Matthew and Luke, that those 500 people could have been the individuals on the mount when Jesus ascended. You know, it's not overt in the text, but I think even the fact that we have one instance of this being spoken about, and then we can look at the individuals, Matthew, Mark, Luke, John, and then others in the New Testament documents that talk about the resurrection of Jesus, that, even James, the brother of Jesus, in the Epistle of James, referring to his brother as our glorious Lord, a title that is attributed only to the God of Israel, Yahweh. So I think we have to explain these particular instances where we don't just have people who are friendly to this happening, but we have individuals who are actually hostile. In James, the brother of Jesus, who the Gospels tell us that Jesus' family was actually very hesitant in how public Jesus' ministry was. Then we have likewise Paul, who started his life as a persecutor, and that has a radical 180 in terms of him then going on and writing the majority of Holy Scripture within the New Testament.
Now, again,
Not talking about the majority of all the content, but just if the most letters. So numerically. So as far as number of contributions, in other words, Paul contributed letters, which tend to be pretty short, and they're significantly the letters are significantly shorter than something like a gospel or something like that. But as far as number of works contributed, Paul is the boss. Quick comment here. Haja says, David Wood, please talk about Christianity. Our faith is not Islam. And Haja, I don't know if you know this. It is so absolutely reprehensible when you say stuff like this that I'm just blocking you. I have no tolerance for this anymore. This idiotic nonsense. One, we're sitting here the entire time talking about Christianity. You're saying stop talking about Islam. So I already think that you have no clue what you're talking about, and you're just a troll. Two, unless you're an undercover Muslim who's just trying to shame us into not talking about Islam, in which case absolutely pathetic. Muslims only question Islam after you've blasted away at Islam, and it is so absolutely horrifyingly bad that you've got Christians. Don't talk about Islam. Okay, their heads have been filled with lies about Muhammad and the Quran, absolute lies about Muhammad and the Quran, and it gives them the false confidence because of all these lies. And you got Christians don't ever respond to that stuff. Well, great, then they never take any alternative seriously. If you added up all the people I've ever come across who've left Islam, probably 95% of them only took the gospel seriously after Islam had been crushed in front of them. And yet you still got people, don't talk about Islam, not interested. And if you catch me at a moment like right now, I am so not interested that I do not want to argue about it. Do not want to try to convince you. I just don't ever want to hear from you again. That's how revolting it is. One of the biggest problems in the world of evangelism is Christians saying, don't criticize Islam. You'll just hurt Muslims' feelings. And you don't want to do that because hurting people's feelings is the worst thing you could do. And then the claims about perfect preservation and scientific miracles, it never g's challenged. Their weird theology never gets challenged. And they have this complete confidence. And I'm just going to point it out because Nabil told me this. Nabil said, after he became a Christian, he said, whenever we were discussing Christian topics, and we were investigating Christian topics, the reliability of the New Testament, Jesus' death by crucifixion, Jesus' resurrection from the dead, Jesus claims to be the divine Son of God. Whenever we were investigating these things, we actually looked at the evidence. He said, I thought to myself, wow, I didn't know that Christians actually had good evidence, but Christians actually have good evidence for everything they're believing. He said, but when I would think that, I would also think, well, even if they show me with 99% certainty that all these claims are true, guess what? I'm still 100% sure that Islam is true because of the scientific miracles, because of the perfect preservation of the Quran, because of the amazing character of Muhammad. And guess what? It was when we went through and challenged all of those issues, that's when he was able to take the claims of Christianity more seriously. So guys, just go away with that. If you want to go in your church or whatever and say, we're never going to talk about Muhammad, fine, go do that. But do not come around here spouting that idiotic nonsense because we know better. Goodbye.
To play devil's advocate, the argument against it goes, look, all these witnesses were likely to have been pretty primitive, mostly illiterate people. Eyewitness testimony notoriously is unreliable. It's the least credible evidence in a courtroom these days, for example. And since the historical method doesn't deal with miracles, it's ridiculous, people say, to base any history on it. And even Matthew's gospel tells us when Jesus appeared in front of his 11 disciples, some of them doubted, to which people say, well, if even not all his disciples believe this, why on earth should we?
Yeah, I think there are a few things going on there. In terms of the historical method and how we actually evaluate things, we only have witness testimony. You know, you do have something that's very different than a courtroom in a modern legal setting, right? Even something like hearsay. Well, all of ancient history in one sense is hearsay, but that doesn't apply when we apply it to the historiographical method. We need to use the same standards that when we would look at something like, say, the biographies of Tiberius with Velleius Paterculus, Tacitus, Suetonius, and Cassiodeo, when we have multiple instances of reporting on someone's life, we look at both the things that they agree on and the things maybe where they have a differentiation in detail, and then we try to the best of our ability explain some of the different instances that are going on. Now, I would say, you know, to the accusation, well, these are just ancient, illiterate people, that's what C.S. Lewis referred to as chronological snobbery. You know, just because people are ancient neither means they're stupid nor that they don't know what's going on. And what we have,
by the way, that is a common thing, like oh, you know, they could believe in the resurrection back then because they were dumb. They understood how death works, ladies and gentlemen. They understood from experience, you die and then you're dead and we bury you and stuff. They understood things like that. They understood, oh my goodness, the guy who died is appearing to us. Something's going on here. They understood that. And guess what? Today we'd have the exact same reaction. Wait a minute. That guy who died and was buried is now here. Something's going on. Either we were wrong about his death, in which case something weird is going on, or he's raised, something weird is going on. Point is, that is not something that, well, they were just dumb back then and we're not. We're smart. Doesn't work like that.
And it's interesting, this comes right after they were talking about Paul, who was anything but uneducated or adult. For one, he was educated in Tarsus in his early days. They had a really good educational system. And then they went to Israel for him to study at the feet of Gamaliel. Paul was exceptionally well educated in his day. And that's even recognized. I mean, in the New Testament, of course, and if maybe somebody wants to dismiss it, but remember at one point the king says, your great learning has driven you mad, right? It's recognized that he had great learning. But even today, scholars today looking at Paul, disagreeing with him as they do, will say he was an incredibly brilliant man. And I suspect anybody who can read him and not think he's brilliant is only giving evidence of their own impoverished understanding, because he really is exceptionally brilliant in quite a number of ways. And I think even Christians for quite a while in their Christian life, even after reading him a lot, will miss a lot of the profundity. I mean, it just doesn't end. Paul is an incredibly deep thinker. And this goes all the way back to Moses, by the way. Remember, Moses was educated in all the learning of the Egyptians. Moses had one of the greatest educations you could possibly have in the ancient world. The Egyptians weren't stupid. They built the pyramids, right? I mean, you're going to call those guys stupid? One of the things that I always think about when I hear this sort of thing is obviously in some ways we're more advanced. We have technological advances, but some of our technological advances still leave us incapable of doing some of the feats that the ancient world pulled off somehow. But besides that, I often think if I was, for example, if you or I were abandoned on an island somewhere, hopefully we could survive, but would we survive as well as one of these ancient figures? I mean,
No.
When I was reading just earlier today, I was reading.
We're going to die, Anthony.
But I was reading Eusebius, fourth century church father. Obviously, he doesn't have all of the knowledge we've accumulated in the sciences and some other things. But there's a lot that we've lost, a lot of us, most of us, just because we don't need them because of our technological advances. If I was on a ship, I don't think I could navigate by the star. Well, I know I couldn't. I couldn't navigate. But the ancient person could very easily navigate his way because they're used to utilizing the stars for different things. I mean, there's just so much that we don't have because of our apparent. I get away with driving somewhere without learning the streets in my city because I've got a GPS. So yeah, in a sense, we're more advanced. But take away my cell phone, and I can't find my way home.
Yeah, and that's similar to. So you got all these. You got everyone. We're smart and we're modern. But it's always in my mind if like civilization breaks down, right? The food supply runs out and there's rioting in the streets and stuff. I'm fine. I'm going to go move in with my hillbilly cousins in West Virginia who live from deer and squirrel and everything else. And guess what? They'll be fine. They'll make it. They'll make it. Other people are going to starve to death. And yet they're the smart ones. They're the smart ones. They know it.
Yeah. And
terms
plus,
of
when you look at the miracle accounts in the Gospels, the whole point is, I mean, these aren't dummies. They don't just think this stuff happens or whatever. When Joseph wants to put away Mary, who's pregnant, it's because he knows how babies are born, right? He's not dumb. That's not the point of these stories, that they're just gullible and believe anything. He wants to put her away because he's thinking, I know how babies are born. Mm-hmm. Right.
Yeah. And when the women come to the apostles and say, Jesus appeared to us, the guy's like, sure, he appeared to you. And then Thomas, who wasn't there, he's like, yeah, sure, he appeared to you guys. Tell you what, I'll perform a little scientific experiment if he shows up. But until then, I'm not believing this stuff. Why? They seem to understand that if someone is crucified and buried, then probably not going to be appearing to you.
This event is really early on after Jesus' death. We have an explanation of what, if the resurrection didn't take place, what we would expect. The 11 disciples are hiding in the upper room. They're scared. They're aware of other messianic movements in the ancient world. Individuals like Simon Bar-Giora, who claimed to be the Messiah when his movement was squashed. So when he died, when he died, his movement was squashed. And so I think we have to look at, okay, what explains these 11 scared disciples then going on to not just proclaim that Jesus did rise from the dead, but actually went to the point of risking their lives in persecution. And some of them did die for that proclamation.
Hey, he's accurate. He said some of them did die. That is the assessment. I just posted an interview with Sean McDowell. Anthony, I'm sure you've heard from back in the day. You got Fox's Book of Martyrs and so on. It listed how the apostles died and a number of the other earlier Christians. And Fox's Book of Martyrs says that all the apostles died some sort of violent death for their faith except John. And that's what's in Fox's Book of Martyrs. But it doesn't give the sources, and some of these sources are actually very late. You're talking like 3rd, 4th, 5th century. As Sean McDowell and I discussed, sometimes a 3rd or 4th or 5th century source is giving accurate information because they were quoting something earlier. Maybe you don't have that and so on. Or maybe the story is just passed down and so on and got to them, and it was actually an accurate story and so on. But from a historical perspective, you generally are looking for some sort of early corroboration or something like that. And so I had a discussion with Sean McDowell, who literally wrote the book on the fate of the apostles. So he went through all the ancient sources and stuff like that and tried to determine what you can establish historically. And anyway, guys, posted a video on that. It's about an hour long, but an interview with Sean McDowell on that, because guess what? Again, the stories in Fox's Book of Martyrs, some of those are very late. And if you wanted to be somewhat critical to make sure that you're only giving accurate information, you should want to only be giving the most accurate information. That's what I'm saying. And so anyway, he goes through that to establish what you can actually establish. Who actually can we say died for their faith?
Yeah, and just to throw in, so even if we limit who actually died, it's still significant that all the apostles continue to preach and spread the message in this hostile context. Mm-hmm. Right, so we have, even in the book of Acts, already in the book of Acts, so very early attestation, Stephen is killed. He's not an apostle, but he's closely associated with them. He has the Spirit. He's a deacon in the early church. He's killed in Acts 7. You have James, the brother of John, is killed. And then, of course, early in church history, James the Just is killed. These are some pretty well-established martyrdoms. And, of course, there are more, but that being the case, remember what this is doing. It's causing the early Christians, I mean, it's providential. This person gets to die for Jesus, which is glorious. And then the Christians are being scattered because of this persecution, which is like scattering the seed. Here's Jesus, the Son of Man, going through and scattering his seed. He sends his followers into the world because of this persecution. But the apostles continue to preach in this context. And even if they're not always being, killed at every turn, they're being persecuted at every turn. The possibility of being killed is always potential. That's always rife. Paul. I preached not long ago on Acts 14, where Paul and Barnabas, after they're in Lystra and they perform a miracle, the people think it's Zeus and Hermes. I always get a kick out of that. Paul and Barnabas are taken for these two Greek gods that have come down as men. But the real kicker is that they want to stone Paul and Barnabas, and they leave and go down to Derbe, and news probably traveled there. Of course, the Jews from Antioch and Iconium came down to persecute them as well. But there in Derbe, they actually are stoned. And just like the Jews came down from up in Lystra and so forth, news would have traveled back to Lystra, where they wanted to stone him, say, hey, look, don't worry, fellas. The people in Derbe got him, right? But then it says that the apostle or the early believers gathered around Paul, and then he got back up and he walked right back into the city, right? But then it says, this is the best part, he retraced his steps. He goes back through all the cities he had previously been in, including Lystra. So if they thought Paul and Barnabas were Zeus and Hermes before when they performed a miracle, now who must they think Paul is? Because he's walking back into town after being stoned and left for dead. Maybe he's a greater god than Zeus and Hermes. Maybe he's, I don't know, Kronos or one of the Titans or something. I get a kick out of it. But this is the life of all the early Christians. They're in this hostile environment. And but the main thing is to consider when people are charlatans and they're making stuff up. There's a goal. There's some end. They want fame, fortune, women, right? They want to be Muhammad hijabs. They want to use religion for
Mutu wives. Gotta have my Mutu wives.
But that's not what the apostles are getting, and so I mean, you got to have some explanation for that sort of thing. Just saying that they're a bunch of charlatans isn't going to. I mentioned Eusebius, his Proof of the Gospel. He's got a thick book where he's arguing the case and brings up all these really great things, but he points out something of the absurdity that you'd have to dream up on the part of the apostles to account for this. You have to get the 12 apostles together to agree, and the 70, because a lot of people forget the 70. Right? There was a broader group of people that were being sent out by Jesus that were sent out earlier, and these are still in the picture when the apostles are being commissioned. And of course, the 120 in the upper room. But you got to get all these people together to agree to just go out and be brazen liars. And then you've got to get them all to maintain that testimony to the bitter end in the face of all this. None of them, absolutely none of them, turn tuck tail or play turncoat and say, okay, we were lying. I mean, I was thinking about this. The mafia, there was a strict code, right, of being loyal. But to the extent that these are not pious people, right? They're not pursuing righteousness. Once their own skin is on the line, they tended to turn on each other. right? Unfortunately, I mean, well, fortunately, but unfortunately, but I mean, if the code is absolute loyalty, and you've got people once their own necks are potentially on the chopping block, turning on each other, it shows you what's typically the case of people who are colluding for something that they know is not good or not true or a lie. And, so how do you get this with these early Christians, that none of them are turning and saying, okay, we were lying and making it all up just so you'd persecute us, just so we could get stoned and whipped. And
we have the Apostle Paul in 2 Corinthians describing his wonderful life as an apostle. He says, 5 times I received at the hands of the Jews the 40 lashes less one. 3 times I was beaten with rods. Once I was stoned. 3 times I was shipwrecked. A night and a day I was adrift at sea, on frequent journeys, in danger from rivers, danger from robbers, danger from my own people, danger from Gentiles, danger in the city, danger in the wilderness, danger at sea, danger from false brothers, in toil and hardship, through many a sleepless night, in hunger and thirst, often without food, in cold and exposure. And apart from other things, there is the daily pressure on me of my anxiety for all the churches. Who is weak and I am not weak? Who is made to fall and I am not indignant? So this is the life of an apostle. It's like, wait, you're doing all this because you made something up? Did all this to make something up? Kind of weird.
now become a Christian and have your best life now.
Yeah.
So I think it's not outside of the realm of possibility for history to actually be able to evaluate this evidence and say, okay, we have these questions. How then do we explain something like an empty tomb? Or even Jesus's disciples go back, and the account of the Pentecost happens in Jerusalem. So Jesus's disciples go back to the scene of the crime in the town where people would have saw him crucified, and now they're proclaiming he's resurrected. Well, why would you go back to the place where people could have actually known what actually happened, especially if you're trying to be disingenuous or dishonest? And then that's where it happens. And Stephen is the first martyr. That also happens in Jerusalem. That would have been a warning shot across the bow for the disciples if they wanted to continue on proclaiming these things. They would have realized that this is controversial, both in Jewish circles and in Gentile circles, to be proclaiming these things, to be declaring Jesus as Lord. One of the earliest confessions of Christianity was Jesus is Lord, when the society was saying Caesar is Lord. And so there were risks politically, there were risks religiously, and yet the disciples go on to proclaim these things, even to the detriment of their own lives.
What do you
Got that, everyone? Let's see what Piers is going to object to here.
say when people say, well, look, there are parts of the New Testament that allude to Jesus as Nazareth as being the Son of God, and then there are parts where he appears to be God himself. How do you
I thought you froze for a second.
I did not freeze. He's just talking about how he's a lifelong Catholic and so on. Anyway.
you counter that argument that there's a
No, to be fair, he could just be, hey, this is something that confuses people. You hear Jesus is God, and you hear Jesus is the Son of God. So what's going on here? Could just be asking for Wes to clarify.
Did you ever see the talk show host? I can't remember his name. If you've seen it, you'll remember. He had Bart Ehrman on, and he's had him on a couple times. This was way back. I think they took one of them off because I constantly try to find it. It was pretty embarrassing for old Bart. Some talk show host, really, really takes him to task. But Bart was saying that Jesus in the Gospels doesn't claim to be God, and the talk show host said he calls himself the Son of God over and over again. And Bart says, yeah, but he doesn't say God. And then the talk show host says, what's the son of a duck? And Bart says, a duck? And he goes, what's the Son of God? And then Bart just kind of goes, yeah. And anyways, it was hilarious the way he did it. And Bart,
that sounds like one of Stephen Colbert's interviews on his old show. That sounds like
Stephen Colbert.
I didn't see that one, but I saw his one where he interviewed Sam Harris, and it was kind of the same. It was kind of the same thing. Him ripping him apart, but being hilarious the entire time.
Yeah, and he did it for like 3 or 4 minutes, and I'm thinking, Bart, disagree with him as you will, but he's a smart guy, really smart guy, very well read, and he has great retention, recall, all the rest. And here's Stephen Colbert just easily sort of taking him apart.
What's the son of a duck?
Yeah. Poor Bart.
Nice.
Inconsistency there.
Yeah, so Son of God is a title that is reserved for not differentiating Jesus from God. You know, in John's gospel in particular, we have instance where Jesus is referring to himself as the Son of God in a way that actually has the Jews picking up stones to stone him. And when he says, you know, what are these good works are you going to stone me for? They say not for your good works, but because you call Jesus your Father, making yourself equal with God. And, you know, Jesus then, he doesn't say, oh, no, you've misunderstood me. You know, my Muslim friends like to point out that there are multiple sons of God throughout the Bible. David was referred to as a son of God. But what's unique is that despite there being, sometimes my Muslim friends like to say sons by the tons, despite that reality, that Jesus is not claiming to be a son of God, he's claiming to be the Son of God in a unique way that not only puts him on equal footing with the Father, but in this monotheistic context of ancient Judaism, actually ascribes to himself honors, attributes, names, and deeds that only God himself has the right to hold.
Hey, he used it. He used hand. He didn't. He left it. He left out the S, but he went with hand. Honors, attributes, names, deeds. Guys, that's a quick breakdown for the different ways that Jesus and his followers are claiming that he is God. Honors, attributes, names, deeds, and then the other one is seat, that he shares the throne. Here you have an objection to what we were just saying. A son of a duck is still not the same as the father duck.
Yeah,
right. So the
son is not the father.
Yeah. So the son duck would have the nature of a duck, but not be the same person as the father. Right.
Well, there you have it. Modalism's out. Right. So now, obviously, we would still want to say there's something more to be said for the unity between father and son.
Yeah,
goes
because
beyond just
created things are in a completely different category. But the point is, you can't use that. You just can't use that to dismiss the claim, because even with the things we're familiar with, we understand why these objections would fail.
Yeah. So the names, like other names are used to talk about God. God is called our shepherd, right? The Lord is my shepherd, Psalm 23. Do we take that term and read everything about earthly shepherds onto God, or do we recognize that it's communicating a point? There's some point of contact between how we use the word and God, though it's not the same in all respects, right? This is where we distinguish between using a word univocally, equivocally, or analogically, right? If we were using it univocally, we would mean that everything that's true of a shepherd is true of God. So God walks around with sandals on and a shepherd's crook and a long robe. No, that's not the point. But it's also not equivocal. It's not using the word in a completely different way than we understand it. But rather it's analogical. Right? There are points of contact. The idea of a shepherd is somebody who cares for his sheep, watches over them, takes care of them, leads them. And that's what we're saying about God when we call him our shepherd. So similarly, when we use terms like father and son, we're recognizing that there are points of contact when we talk about the first person of the Trinity and the second that correspond to those terms, but we don't think that everything that's true of a father and a son is necessarily true of the father and the son, right? But it's very clear that at least this much is entailed by the use of that term, and Wes is making this point, but just to underscore it, in John 5, one of my favorite texts, Jesus heals a man on the Sabbath. And the reason I get a kick out of it is because Jesus just healed a man. He made a man whole on the Sabbath, which points to Jesus restoring people to full health and life. And the Jews want to kill him because he's done this. So the reason this is funny to me is because apparently it's illicit to heal a man on the Sabbath, but it's not illicit to want to kill a man on the Sabbath, right? So you can't do that work, but we can do this one. But Jesus could have justified what he did in any number of ways. He did so on other occasions. He pointed to the example of David under extreme circumstances. He did what was otherwise not lawful. when he ate the showbread, which only priests could do. He could have appealed to something like that. But what Jesus did on this occasion was he upped the ante. He said, "My Father is working until this to this very day, and I too am working." And what he does here is he uses, in Greek, it's called the present of past action still in progress. It means the Father has always been at work till this very day. He hasn't ever ceased being active, even on the Sabbath. And then he says, "Me too." He's saying, I too have been at work with my Father throughout the past up until the present. So he's claiming to be his works to be coextensive with the Father's works. And then it says the Jews wanted to kill him because not only was he breaking the Sabbath, but was even calling God his own Father, making himself equal with God. So this is how they understood his claim to deity. And then what does he do as he goes on to explain this? He says he does whatever he sees the Father doing. Everything the Father does, the Son does. There isn't anything the Father does that the Son doesn't do. And in fact, I think you could go through that chapter and go through all the little, words in the acronym there that Wes just used: honor, attributes, names, deeds. Jesus has the name of God there, right? I mean, they say he's making himself to be equal with God. Close enough, right? He does call himself the Son, but he's given the attributes of God. They say he's claiming equality with God. He claims to do the works of raising the dead and of judging people. But he also says that all must honor the Son, even as they honor the Father, right? I mean, you could just go down the list. The evidence for the deity of Christ in that chapter, in connection with his claim to be the Son, is all over it.
There's lots of the duck comments saying what's the son of a duck, and someone said son of a quack quack. Interesting stuff. Someone was saying stop saying Bart Ehrman is smart. He's not smart. No, he's smart, guys. He's smart.
Now I understand what somebody's probably trying to say. If you're talking about spiritually, the wisdom that Scripture talks about, certainly he's lacking that. But that's not the same thing as, smarts. A person can be educated without having that wisdom that's conducive to eternal life. But I mean, if you look, Bart Ehrman, there's so much stuff that Bart Ehrman's done that most people don't know about. I mean, I've got works of his translating stuff, the Apostolic Fathers, for example. He translated a classic version of the Apostolic Fathers. I mean, he's done stuff like this. Textual scholars think Bart Ehrman is a competent textual scholar, even if they disagree sometimes with his findings. He's in error about Jesus, and it's obviously life or death error there, but doesn't mean he wasn't schooled.
Yeah, and it reminds me of Immanuel Kant. He said the only thing that's good without qualification is a good will. And the reason is because any other feature of a human being can actually be bad in a certain context. But intelligence is on this list, right? Normally we'd say intelligence is something good. Well, what if it's the intelligence of a serial killer or something like that allows him to get away with killing people for decades and so on, or to always get away with it because he's so smart? He's intelligent. You'd wish he wasn't as intelligent. You say, gosh, I wish this guy was dumber so that he'd get caught sooner. Or someone who, carries out some, one of the great genocides of the 20th century or something. You just, okay, there were some smart people carrying out that plan, but they had an evil will. It would have been nice if they hadn't been so intelligent. Or imagine a man who horribly abuses his wife and he can get away with it because he's big and strong. Normally strength would be something good. If it's attached to a bad will, then it's something that's bad. And so Bart Ehrman is definitely smart, very intelligent. So if you want to disagree with him, you disagree with his will, not about whether he's smart. All right, let's see what they got here.
And so the Jews throughout the New Testament, throughout Jesus's ministry and his goings on, they aren't confused by the things he says. When he, at the beginning of Mark's gospel, when he forgives the sins of a person, their response is, who can forgive sins but God alone? And they're exactly right. Only God can forgive our sins. And so Jesus is, in his kind of answer, saying, I'm doing this so that you know that the Son of Man can forgive sins. It's not a correction. That's a reframing in saying, yes, you're right. Only God can forgive sins. That's what I'm doing. Who does that make me?
I've seen Ricky Gervais on various talk shows. He's one of the world's most famous atheists. And he says, look, there are 3,000 gods if you add them all.
Okay, well, we'll pause this objection, take a couple super chats real quick. Susie's jumping into Ricky Gervais.
I think I know where this is going. I haven't heard this.
Yeah, that's what I mean. That's what I mean. So he's saying, hey, Ricky Gervais says, hey, you've got there's 3,000 gods out there. So why you guys think you got the right one here? Shout out to Jack Ray for sending 10 Roadshow memberships. Let's see, we've got Tyrone here. I have nothing about veganism to say today. Well, that'd be a first, and you still had to bring it up anyway. Thanks for the clear gospel. David, Anthony just starting. Summary of Quran, some Quran after summarizing Bible, some Bible. So some Bible dictionary. Some Bible summary. I guess that's what he does on his channel. Chloe says, do you think Constantine making Christianity equal a Roman religion, setting up Clovis for Catholicism 200 years later, making the Western Europeans Catholic, making us Anglo people Christian, was divine intervention?
Your silence an indicator that you want me to speak to that? So I think it was one of many things that God has done in history to advance Christianity. Doesn't mean that everything involved in it or that came out of it is perfect or ideal, but God is at work. The church has been spreading across the globe. It's remarkable. I mean, every time I stand up and preach, I always think, man, this is incredible. I'm preaching I'm 2,000 years at the end of what started right here, right? I mean, if you go back to Genesis, it's even further, of course, but God tells Abraham, through you, all nations and families on earth will be blessed. And so as I'm speaking as somebody who's part of the fulfillment of that. That's incredible to me. But not everything in history has been altogether lovely. It's been a mess in many ways.
Yeah, and so Chloe, you could believe that that Constantine actually got some sign from God that he needs to. So the story about Constantine is that he saw a cross in the sky and it's something like that, or had a vision that said "conquer by this" or something like this. So he changed his perspective, and then he made Christianity a legal religion. It later became the official religion and so on, and so. You can believe that God gave him a sign and so on, and not necessarily mean that has God's stamp of approval on everything that followed after that, or even that God's stamp of approval was on everything that that Constantine did. So just like you can believe that that God guided me to Christianity or God guided you to Christianity or something like that, doesn't mean that we always have God's stamp of approval on everything we do. So you kind of have to look like case by case as far as what the person is doing. Hunter, hey, how was your Good Friday, David? Glad to catch you live again. It's been a minute. Excited for Easter tomorrow. Yeah, this is Hunter. Met him at a seminary. Yes, these are good times. Again, was planning on doing different things, but now we're live. We baptized a family of 5 in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit this Holy Saturday and celebrated the harrowing of Hades. Christ tore every root of hell for sinners like me.
See, there he's using the word Holy Saturday, or the phrase, and then he mentions the harrowing of Hades, which is a reference to the descent.
If Jesus don't exist, the I am Honda Civic 2.0. Oh, I think he meant then. If Jesus didn't exist, then I am a Honda Civic 2.0. I agree. David would stream on my birthday. Sweet. Take my Canadian chuckles. You see, he's paid for, so powerful. Haha. In Israel, they have shekels. In Canada, they have chuckles. It is funny that I always forget that Wes is, I'm guessing, Canadian, and they pronounce words weirdly. And every time I hear it, it's when he says word like out or about or something like that. And you have some Canadians where they say a boot or something like that. His is more subtle. Jordan Peterson's is more subtle, but it'll be like, Instead of out, it'll be like out, out, out. But I remember watching, when I was a kid, I watched a show on Nickelodeon called You Can't Do That on Television. And I was like, why do they say about weird? They sound like idiots, right? And I didn't find out until I was an adult. I went and looked it up, and they're like, oh, yeah, it's a Canadian show. Anyway, one of those really not important things to share, but now you all know. Well, how dare you go live in secret?
They also have some spelling issues. They don't know how to spell color and other words.
Let's just randomly add a dumb U to everything. Hi, David. Would you consider debating Alex O'Connor again, perhaps on the topic of whether Jesus resurrected? Yeah, sure. I'll debate the resurrection. I debated the resurrection a bunch of times. I got to say, I was pretty confused how the Jordan Peterson clip was presenting an opposing opinion to Wes Huff when I first saw the clip. Yeah, I gave what I think was going on there, but I finally finished and posted my second Islamic Dilemma video. Oh, good, because Celerio's been going carefully through stuff. I'm not doing videos elaborating on all the key passages, but choosing core ayat from each surah to form the core of each video's argument. That is what I would recommend. I think we ultimately want some sort of content on everything, but that'll be like a team effort. In other words, there will be someone who fills in this gap, someone who fills in that gap, and so on. But in general, you want to do a really good job on the most important stuff. Richard is my son who watches your stream. Smart boy. A young apologist in the making. Teach them young to understand the truth. Study to show oneself approved. Yes, this is all good advice. This is good parenting advice for everyone out there. So what you said is that according to Galatians 1:8, Islam is in the Bible. Aha, you see, Islam is in the Bible. Yep. It's very powerful. When you help bring as many people to Christ as D would, then you can speak on what he covers. God bless you, David. I mean, people can speak. It's just when people are giving like advice and they're just stating it, and it's like it's completely wrong and it's bad and it is detrimental to evangelism in the world. It's just, oh gosh, because people don't know. I've said before, guys. I've said this in live streams before. You don't realize what things were like if you go back to like 2008, 2009. It was standard in Christianity, even in churches where they're training Christians to reach Muslims with the gospel. It was standard. Don't ever criticize Muhammad or the Quran. Don't ever do it. If you do, you'll just drive a Muslim away. He'll never listen to you again, which means he'll never listen to the gospel, and therefore he's going to be doomed to hell, all because you criticized Muhammad or the Quran. They were training this. And I was sitting there thinking, this goes against everything in my experience. Everything. I start criticizing Muhammad. They can't stay away. They come right at me. And so it's like, why are you saying this? I traced it back. I tried to figure out where they were getting that. Where are you getting the idea that you don't criticize Muhammad or the Quran? Where are you getting it? I traced it to two sources, apart from just Christians in the West thinking you don't want to ever hurt anyone's feelings. Apart from that general sort of thing. Apart from that, they were getting it from two sources. They were getting it from Christian missionaries in Muslim countries who would come back and speak at a church. So you got a Christian who is a missionary in Pakistan or something like this, and he comes back and then he talks about how to share the gospel with Muslims. And they would say, don't ever criticize Muhammad or the Quran. I'll be like, oh, well, it makes sense for that. Yeah, it makes sense in Pakistan. It makes sense in Pakistan not to criticize Muhammad or the Quran if you want to continue evangelizing. That makes sense for them. It doesn't make sense to say that to someone in the United States. So not a good source of information on how you're supposed to do things in the United States. Two, they were getting it from Muslim speakers at interfaith dialogues. In other words, they'd have an interfaith dialogue at a school, Christian, a Muslim, a Jew, and they all get together and talk about their beliefs. And the Muslim would say, isn't it great that we're here building bridges and we're all getting along? That's great. But just so you know, if you really want to keep these bridges going, never criticize Muhammad or the Quran, not to a Muslim. No. Don't do that. Don't do that. We want the bridges. We want the bridges. So just remember, never criticize Muhammad or the Quran. And then these Christians would tell me, hey, you're supposed to never supposed to criticize Muhammad or the Quran. Where'd you get that? Heard from the interfaith Muslim guy. And I'm just like, usually all I have to do is state it back to them, what they just said, and hope that they understand how ridiculous it is. I would say, so you're telling me that a Muslim speaker told you how to interact with Muslims if you want to get the gospel. And you think he's giving you reliable information on how to witness to Muslims. That's what you think. You think the Muslim speaker at your interfaith event is trying to give you good information on how to reach Muslims with the gospel. Is that what you think? Like, because me just saying it sounds absolutely insane. It sounds like an insane thing to say, but this is what they were telling me. Yes, I got good information from the Muslim on how to reach Muslims with the gospel. Oh my goodness. Wow. Yeah. So anyway, the point here, ladies and gentlemen, 2008, 2009, 2010, that was standard. Most of the comments I got from Christians back then were, David, how dare you? You're doing everything wrong. You don't know what you're doing. Fortunately, people have seen over the years, they've just seen it by experience. They've just seen, wait a minute, when people are leaving Islam, who are the people who are talking to them? It seems like the guys who are criticizing Islam are the ones who are leading people out of Islam. And it seems like the people who never criticize Islam, we just don't see people leaving Islam over there. And so fortunately, things are better now. It still annoys the crap out of me when some random person shows up and just states it as fact. This is what you shouldn't be talking about Islam. It's not our faith. Oh my goodness. Is Jesus a man or the Son of Man? Good question. We stand refuted. He's got to be one or the other. Watching apologetics from David Wood and Sam Shamoon has encouraged me to dive more into Scripture and study to be a pastor. That's good. Learning Scripture, being a pastor.
That's good.
Just don't be corrupted and be like Muhammad Hijab if you become a pastor. Are you familiar with Ray Vanderlaan? No. He teaches the text through Jewish lens. He says Jesus claims to be God all the time, but as a Jew, we don't catch the references. A lot of his remez refer to passages equating himself with God. You familiar with Ray Vanderlaan, Anthony?
Not that person, but I would say, I mean, sometimes I think that some people are trying to palm something off on you by calling it, Jewish or looking at it through a Jewish lens. And the reason I'm mentioning this is not, of course, to refer to this person, but because I see a lot of people hoodwinked by this sort of thing. Somebody comes along and says, we're looking at this through a Jewish lens. And almost never do these people actually know what a Jewish lens really is. They don't know what first century Jews believed. They don't know what Second Temple Jews believed. They're just assuming that Dave, their next door neighbor, is a reliable standard for what Judaism is. Or Tobias Singer over there, right? There's a reason that Tobias Singer won't debate actual Christian apologists anymore. I mean, he avoids them like the plague because he knows they're going to call him on that sort of stuff. But it is true. Here, what I would say is, as long as it's steeped in Scripture, the Old Testament, and bona fide ancient sources representing Jewish thought, I think it's very valuable, very useful. One thing as an example, I think this makes the point quite easily. If you look at Mark's gospel, it's what is called by certain scholars narrative Christology. So it's setting forth Christ's deity more in terms of the story than it is just making overt statements like John does. Not that it never makes overt statements, but to the Jewish person steeped in Old Covenant history, this would have shouted almost more loudly than any overt statement. So think about this, for example. Here you've got this guy coming along, and he delivers, this just skipping to Mark 4, he delivers his disciples from the sea. And then immediately after that, he encounters a man who's filled with a legion of demons. And how does he rout this legion? Remember, a legion is a term for a military unit. He routs them by causing them to go into a herd of pigs and then go down an embankment and be drowned in the sea. So just note the chronology here. Jesus delivered his disciples from the storm-tossed sea. Then he routs Satan's army, causing them to drown in the sea. Immediately following that, he feeds a multitude of Israelites in the wilderness. Thousands of Israelites he feeds miraculously in the wilderness. Those are not only Exodus events, that's the Exodus order. And you could go through the whole Gospel of Mark, and it's exactly all the way through following the Exodus. But what's striking is Jesus appears doing not merely what you might see Moses doing in the narrative. He's doing what God does in the Old Testament narrative. So he ends up looking both like Moses and like God, almost as if he is the God who spoke through Moses, but also the prophet that Moses pointed to and said was going to come into the world. And it's in this context that it sets forth Christ's deity. And so if you read it from an Old Testament background, then yeah, it shouts loudly and clearly. And, those who don't read it that way will miss it.
Trey says, have you been watching the revivals happening in the UK this Holy Week? Beautiful and powerful to see. Yeah, I've seen pictures, people pointing out there are way bigger events happening than in previous years. And guys, you can go back. I said it like 2 months ago or something like that. I posted a video saying time to get excited about 2025 because there are a number of things lining up. One, you've got the avalanche of apostasy and Islam. Dawa's desperate. And I said, this is going to be a bad year for Dawa. And what do we see? Crumbling everywhere. But I also pointed out this is the year when the new atheism has been losing its momentum. It's been losing its momentum for the past couple of years, but people are really catching on that all the predictions that the new atheism, keep in mind, I'm not talking about regular, just normal atheists, I'm talking about the aggressive ones who are, if we just get rid of Christianity, then, we'll get a scientific utopia and stuff like that. And it's like, okay, you had millions of people become these aggressive atheists running around screaming Sky Daddy. In what way has the world improved at all? Because it doesn't seem like it improved in any noticeable way. In fact, seems like the whole world started going insane pretty darn quickly. So people are actually realizing, wait a minute, all the big threats to Christianity are kind of as far as the ones that have been attacking and so on, they're not doing well right now. They're kind of very, very shaky right now, and their foundations are crumbling beneath them. And people are catching on, and people are looking at that. So it's a good time. It's a good time. So see it. And I suspect we're going to see more of that this year. Son of a duck is a duck. Son of a goose is a goose. But the son of God is Ezra. Confirmed by duck, duck, and goose. Oh, hi. Jesus resurrected, you see. That is good. That's a powerful point. Just so you know, Anthony, we have a ton of Ezra worshipers here. David, if you're going to talk about teamwork, then you should make Solaria Rosenquart a mod. I actually don't like, I've got a couple mods and stuff. I don't like making people mods until I come up with some set of rules, because I have had in the past where I'll make someone a mod and then they're annoyed at someone and they just start blocking someone who's annoying them and not something I would block them for. I block people who annoy me. So I don't actually have a problem with blocking someone that when I say annoyed, it's more like, is this person going to waste my time? Like, this person's going to keep running his mouth about this stuff, and I can either let it go, in which case he's saying all this dumb stuff, or I can respond, but is it worth the response? Because this person's such a dope, I don't want to invest the time. And so sometimes I'm just like, I'm not letting this person waste my time. Boom, that's it, click. So I don't actually have a problem with other people saying, this person's just wasting everyone's time, click. I just have a problem if you're doing it on someone else's channel. Like, I wouldn't want to do that on someone else's channel. And so anyway, I'm not saying Solaria would do that. Solaria may be the greatest mod of all time. I just want to actually write down some little description for mods. Say, this is when you time out someone. This is when you block someone or something like that. Something to where anyone I assign, I say, okay, you're a mod. Follow these rules. But I want to put that together first. And what are your thoughts on Lutherans? Ha! Lutherans. Lutherans. Well, it sounds like Lutherans. No.
The thing with names sometimes is the name on the outside of a building can stay the same while things change within, and so I would just say there's and Lutherans, my Lutheran brothers and sisters would say the same thing. There are some good Lutheran churches, and there are some that aren't. Yeah, it's kind of like, what happens if you've got a bottle of wine and you leave the cap off for a while? It doesn't remain wine, right? But the label will stay the same.
Yeah.
So you just have to, evaluate groups based on whether they're true to their original moorings and so forth. If the name applies to them, I mean. So in the case of Lutherans, are they really holding Lutheran beliefs, the Book of Concord and Augsburg Confession and all that kind of stuff? And a lot of them don't. So otherwise, yeah, I mean, they believe the gospel if they're believing Lutheran things.
And that's Anthony's assessment of the Lutherans. I'm just kidding. I know some really awesome Lutherans.
All up from all the religions. Who's to say your one's the real one? And what about the others then? Do they not exist? Are they not real gods? In other words, his position is, look, you can't all be right unless there are 3,000 different versions of a supernatural spiritual being overseeing us all. What do you say to him?
Yeah, well, I think it's a rather foolish argument in that competition doesn't negate objective reality. So say we're using a courtroom analogy. If someone was convicted of a crime here in the city of Toronto where I live, and he stood before a judge and he said, really, you think I committed this crime? Do you know how many people are in the city? We have 3 million people in this city. And you think I'm the one who did the crime? Really? Out of all the, how many people are in Toronto? How many people are in Ontario? How many people are in Canada? How many people are in North America? You really think that given the amount of people that are on this earth, I'm the one who committed the crime? We wouldn't then look at the judge and say, well, that's a good argument. Have you really thought about how many other people are around who, just because this particular individual you think committed the crime? Really? Well, no, we don't just arbitrarily, pick someone, or in the case of Christianity, pick a God. We believe that the God of the Bible is the true God based on the evidence of not just what we find in the Bible, but, the fine-tuning of the universe, of the morality in the objective reality of this world, and the fact that we are, Piers, people who operate with morals, with meaning and intention, and have intrinsic worth. But we look at these things and we don't arbitrarily pick Yahweh, the God of the Bible, over Zeus and Thor and Allah and Buddha. We do it, I would argue, based on the concrete, publicly available evidence that points to the truth claims that I would argue Christianity answers in regards to the ultimate questions we have.
So the idea there, ladies and gentlemen, so the objection from Ricky Gervais is, if you add up all the different religion, there are 3,000 different gods. You're so stupid. You think you've got the right one, which is hilarious because Ricky Gervais believes that he's correct and that everyone else is wrong. So it's like, oh, you believe as a Christian you're right and all these other guys are wrong? Ha 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 ha! How dumb can you be? And meanwhile, he's sitting there, ha ha ha! I'm right and everyone else is wrong. So not the most consistent objection. But as Wes was pointing out, it's not like all these different beliefs account for the evidence equally well, and so we're just picking the one that we like best, or something like that. The God of the Bible seems to account for a lot of things. It accounts for all the big arguments in like apologetics as far as the existence of the universe and the fine-tuning of the universe and the origin of life and human consciousness and morality and laws of logic and all. It accounts for all of those issues as far as theism is concerned, but also accounts for evidence about Jesus and Jesus' resurrection and so on. And people massively overestimate how they overestimate how many religions there are out there that actually say, here's the evidence and here's how you can know this is true. There aren't a lot. There's only a couple. Christianity does it. Mormonism does it to an extent in the sense that they'll say, and here you say this prayer and then you'll feel this and so on. So that will be some kind of confirmation. The point is they're actually offering some sort of confirmation. And they will make claims about things that Joseph Smith experience and so on and say that you can investigate these things. So you have that. Islam offers evidence. Sadly, everything is just based on lies. Well, but you can know that it's true because of the perfect preservation. Just don't actually investigate it. Just trust me, bro. Because the moment you actually look into it, it doesn't work. Same thing with the scientific miracle. Same thing with any of it. But at least they're offering arguments. The point here is the number of religions and ideologies out there that say, and here's how you can know that this one is true. You're already dealing with a handful. You're only dealing with a handful already, which is why it's good to actually start with those and then go and look at them and say, okay, which one of these few that actually say, here's how you can know this is true, which one of them, when I investigate it, actually has good evidence for their claims? It ain't Islam. I'll tell you that, it ain't Islam. And what Anthony and I were talking about earlier, if you heard the claims of a Christian that Jesus rose from the dead and claimed to be God and all these things, you'd think, oh, come on, if I go in there and actually examine, I'm going to find out this is some late legendary stuff. No, what you find, if you actually investigate it, is belief in his resurrection goes back to the earliest Christian church. Belief in his divine nature goes back to the earliest Christian church. So whatever happened, it happened very early at the very beginning. And so the question is, what happened? And as Wes was pointing out earlier, you got to go with the inference, make an inference to the best explanation. What accounts for this? Jesus making some amazing claims about himself and Jesus rising from the dead and appearing to his followers. That accounts for it. If you have a better explanation, let's see it. But the problem with the alternative explanations is none of them really fit the evidence. They don't.
You could argue that Jesus Christ was the first and greatest celebrity that the world had ever seen.
I called Wes, what did I call him earlier? Rock star, apologetics rock star now, because he's going around on all the shows and stuff. And now Piers just said that Jesus is the first celebrity. I don't think that's true. You did have really famous people back then, so I don't know exactly what it means. But
I know lots of really big.
At the same time, though, he certainly wasn't a celebrity in certain respects in his own time. He was hated, obviously, in the religious elite, and others wanted to kill him. But it's interesting in the Gospels how much Jesus tries to avoid any kind of fanfare.
That's
and
true.
So forth.
I wasn't even thinking about that.
Yeah, I mean, he's constantly like, don't tell anybody about this.
Yeah,
right?
don't tell everyone about this miracle I just performed. Don't tell anyone I'm the Messiah. Don't go around saying these things.
Yeah, and then he would go off and pray when crowds are thronging, trying to get near him and so forth. He definitely wasn't looking for any earthly glory. All the glory that he got was largely in the wake of his ascension. So you can't claim that even Jesus was, we were talking before about the apostles not doing this for some sordid end like getting money or fame or power or women. Certainly Jesus, even during his lifetime, is showing the opposite of those pursuits as well.
Celebrities, and I know a lot of stuff about them, and then I read stuff about them which I know to be untrue. In other words, a mythology builds up around incredibly famous people over time that often...
Oh, I just got it. I just got the point he was making. I thought he was just randomly saying Jesus is a celebrity. He's saying when someone is a celebrity, a bunch of stories can arise about that. Matter of fact, he could have pointed out, this would have tied in perfectly. He could have said like Elvis, Elvis, such a huge celebrity, he died. What happened? People start saying that they see him. People start claiming to see him afterwards. That it wouldn't have been a great response, but it would have tied in perfectly.
Bears no relation to reality, and often they don't really care if they're still alive because it all adds to the general mythology and celebrity status, and why kill a good story if you can possibly avoid it, and so on. When you read the New Testament with an historian's eye, do you see evidence of mythology creeping in where the basic tenets of Jesus of Nazareth and what happened to him and so on may well all be, to your eyes, verifiable historically, but that actually there may be mythology built up around that kind of character, and it's almost impossible to test that?
Yeah, I'm sympathetic to this argument in that I think we do see mythological drift for particular people, especially as there is a time gap between, some of the instances that we have in terms of written documentation of these individuals. I think what I would look at as a historian is when we're looking at the particulars of Jesus's life, there are things that I just don't think you would make up. I mean, even the fact that Jesus comes from the city Nazareth, it's really the boonies, for lack of a better way of putting it, of Israel. People didn't expect Jesus to come from Nazareth. They didn't expect the Messiah to be a traveling itinerant rabbi. They expected in Jesus's day, with the cultural expectation of who the Messiah, the Christ, the anointed one who was predicted by particularly individuals like the prophets in the Old Testament, they expected him to be a conqueror. They expected him to come and to release the nation of Israel from under the oppression of the Romans. They did not expect the Messiah to be murdered by the Romans. And so I think if you're making up stories about him, there are particular details that we find in the New Testament and in the biographies of Jesus's life that really the only true explanation for them, I would contend, is because they actually happened. Even if you read the accounts of the biographies, the disciples really come across as pretty dumb sometimes. And
is that why you emphasize disciples? Like, duh. I've seen that before.
Oh.
The disciples. They really seem.
Jesus is teaching them, and they just continue to not get what he's talking about. Ultimately, to the point where Jesus is telling them he's going to be handed over, he's going to be crucified, he's going to rise on the third day. And even his closest disciple, Peter, is saying, that's not going to happen. And he's pushing back against Jesus. And so I think in terms of what we as historians refer to as the criteria of embarrassment, women being the first eyewitnesses to the tomb in a day when women really weren't very good eyewitnesses for particular events. They weren't considered good eyewitness testimony. And we see kind of a trying to remedy that in later apocryphal documents like the Gospel of Peter. Gospel of Peter, which is written in, the subsequent centuries and has no real association with the Peter of history, tries to smooth over this by having Roman and Jewish officials being the first eyewitnesses to the tomb, because whoever the author of that document was embarrassed by the fact that the historical Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, have women as the first eyewitnesses to the tomb. So I think if we're asking the questions of mythological drift, I also think we need to account for the fact that there are details within the New Testament that would be embarrassing if they were made up. Why would you make up embarrassing facts about the closest disciples of Jesus, about the first eyewitnesses, and even about the kind of circumstances surrounding Jesus's life, unless those were actually things that actually did happen and they're trying to be honest with the information?
Everyone catch that? That's called the principle of embarrassment, or the criterion of embarrassment there. So go back to Pierce's objection. Wait a minute, someone becomes famous, all sorts of stories quickly arise. And guess what? Stories did arise about Jesus, right? That, in other words, Pierce is correct, because you end up with more and more stories as the centuries go on, and people make up more and more stories. Some of them ended up in the Quran, Jesus giving life to clay birds and things like that. We don't have any first century evidence that this happened. These are later stories when people are, as Piers pointed out, you've got a celebrity, you can make up a story, and your story, because everyone is so interested in the latest story. Today it would be gossip. You can make up something about some celebrity right now and pass it around very quickly. And if it's something interesting, people would jump on it. Why? Because they want more stories about this person and so on. So Piers is pointing out, well, how do you know that's not what's going on with Jesus? Well, that did happen with Jesus. We know that it happened later on. And so the question is, how do you know it wasn't happening early on? How do you know it wasn't happening early on? And there are a number of ways to deal with that. One, you look for your earliest material. You look for what can be traced back to the earliest strata of history there. But also, you've got other historical principles. Wes gave one example, principle of embarrassment. If you're saying, hey, Jesus is some rock star, first century guy who's becoming famous as a miracle worker and stuff, and so people are going to make up stories about him, how do you know what you can, how do you know you're getting to the truth about him? And Wes is pointing out, well, there's all this stuff that people wouldn't have invented if they were making stuff up. Why would you make up a story about him being from Nazareth, something like that? Back then that would have been like, I grew up in a trailer park in Granville, West Virginia. It's like if you were trying to make a story about me being this great figure who's coming upon the scene to be the Messiah and stuff, what's the point in making that up? Like, why that location? And he's pointing out, it seems like that's just where he was from, and that's it. And then it was known. There's no reason to make that up. The best explanation for why it would be in your sources is that's where he was from. And he points out, he gives the example of the women at the tomb, that the women were the first witnesses there. And it's like, okay, if you're making up a story about Jesus rising from the dead, and you're in a culture that has a pretty low view of the value and reliability of the testimony of a woman, why would you make up? If you're making up, you can make up anything. You can say all the apostles were standing there. All the apostles gathered around the tomb to mourn for Jesus, and then the tomb rolled back and Jesus walked out and appeared. You could make up anything you want. Why make up a story about women being the ones who were there, coming back and telling the apostles and so on? And why? Why are you making all this stuff up? So the point is, yes, people do make stuff up, but you can look at stories and ask yourself, is this something that someone would make up? keep in mind, even if it's something where someone could make it up, you could say, oh, I could see why someone would make that up. It could still be true. It could be something that happened that is also something that someone might make up. But there are other things where you're sitting there thinking, no one would make this up. This doesn't make any sense to make this up. And so a historian looks at that and says, that's probably true. So as a modern example, because this gets used in court as well, but just imagine, I think Key and Peele did a skit on this, or maybe this was on Mad TV, but I saw an example of this in a video, but I forget the details, but it's something like, if you said, hey, are you the guy who stole the watch? You got a guy on trial. Are you the guy who stole the watch from that store? And suppose this guy says, no, I was down the street selling crack to kids. You say, what? What? You were doing what? You said, I couldn't have been the guy who stole the watch. I'm telling you, I was over there selling crack to kids. And here's all the evidence that I was selling crack to kids. In that situation, guess what? That guy is probably going to get off of stealing that watch. He's probably going to walk on stealing that watch because people are going to be going, there's no way he'd be making up a story about selling crack to kids and giving us all the evidence so that we can convict him on selling crack to kids when all he was accused of is stealing a watch. You wouldn't make that sort of thing up. Now, if he'd said, well, I couldn't have stolen that watch because I was volunteering at the local charity for the homeless, and don't go check it out because they're not going to confirm any of this because I was invisible that day. Okay, well, now we're not going to believe you.
How excited do you get?
What's that?
I was going to point out in Mark's gospel, it's interesting, he doesn't mention Christ's women followers at all until you get to the cross, and then thereafter they're present at each crucial moment. They're there at the cross, they're there at the burial, they're there at the resurrection. So Mark had no special interest apparently in talking about his women followers. He only brings them in here because that's what happened, right? I mean, he could have just, if he's just making things up, he could have just continued with how he had been telling the story, ignoring the women, right? But if in Mark 15:40, it says, there were also some women looking on from a distance, among whom were Mary Magdalene and Mary, the mother of James the Less, and Joseph and Salome. When he was in Galilee, they used to follow him and minister to him. And there were many other women who came up with him to Jerusalem. See, Mark has to explain this sudden introduction of women here. Again, I mean, just the whole point is they're brought up because they're the witnesses, they're the link in the chain. They see the crucifixion, they see the burial, they see the empty tomb.
And again, why? So if you don't understand the principle, ladies and gentlemen, again, you can make up anything. Why make that up when that would have made you a kind of a laughing stock? And that was actually that was an issue in the 2nd century. Who was it? I think was it Celsus? I think it was Celsus. But it was someone who actually made fun of them. They're like, ha ha ha! You can tell the story about the resurrection when women were the witnesses. You bunch of idiots, right? It became something to mock Christians for. So the point is, why would you make it up if you can make up anything? Why are you making up something that actually hurts your case rather than something that helps your case? And as was pointed out, just seems like they're recording that's what happened, and that it's not something that someone make up. It's something that happened, and they recorded. A couple super chats because they're a funny one here. Hang on. But we got Jesus resurrected, eh? That's how the Canadians say it. Best evidence for resurrection outside the Bible. If you're just saying outside the Bible, I would instantly go to the next generation of Christians, some of whom knew the apostles, but Clement of Rome, Ignatius, and Polycarp, and so on. And guess what? Jesus rose from the dead, and they're the guys who knew the original followers. What are your thoughts on that, Anthony?
Yeah, I mean, so properly done, all sorts of other arguments can be made, even if they're not going to be the things I would rush to. I think the Bible has evidence.
That's by far your main source, right? These are the guys who are writing on it. It's like saying, when you're saying, hey, rule out your main sources of everyone who was really interested in this in the 1st century and were writing down the documents. Rule those out. Then what's your best evidence outside that stuff? Well,
yeah. One thing I would say here is this isn't necessarily what I would consider a public argument, but if the question is why do I believe, I explained earlier my own realization of my utter depravity and that I had no other hope than that this gospel is true. But part of what I mentioned was that I was doing what I did because I loved it. And there's just no way. It's like somebody telling me to dislike garlic and like onions. I love garlic. I hate onions. I can't choose to not to be the case, right? It's just, that's what I am. There has to, something fundamentally has to change my nature in order for that to be different. And I don't have control over that. Well, I absolutely loved my sin. I didn't want Christ, holiness, or anything else. And the message of the gospel, the resurrection, utterly transformed me. And so to me, that's just compelling. I mean, the Bible spoke accurately. I mean, this just still blows me away. I know that other people didn't necessarily have this experience, but other books flatter people. They flatter you. They flatter me. Even if they're talking bad about you, like the Quran calls people the worst of creatures, but then it acts like you could just shake your, dust yourself off and just start following Allah and so forth, as if it's just, the difference between, I don't know, waking up in a good mood or a bad. It's just, to me, it's like, it doesn't really accurately assess human nature. When I look at the Bible, it describes me for the utterly, corrupt person I was and provided a solution. And I think this is powerful evidence that the Christ who does this in the human heart has the ability to rise from the dead. But again, I mean, this isn't like, I understand why unbelievers are going to look at this and just sort of scoff at it, but it doesn't matter to me if they scoff at it. I'm the guy that knows the reality of that depraved heart and what it is now, so.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And, so those apostles, and, Wes is pointing this out, and this is just principle of embarrassment, but, these guys look like a bunch of dopes, but these are the leaders of the early church. So if you're in the early church and you're making up stories about the leaders of your church, you're going to make up a bunch of stories about these guys being a bunch of dopes and so on. So anyway, guys, the point is there's a ton of different directions to go with this and where this becomes relevant. In fact, one is coming up here in the chat. Let me see here in a couple seconds. Hey, this is actually a funny idea. Still waiting for David to challenge Mike Winger to Mubahala. I might do that. I might play the clips of all these guys challenging each other to Mubahalas and then saying, and I've been inspired by this and I challenge Mike Winger to Mubahala. And that'd be funny. I got the super sticker.
You keep saying it a certain way, and you're probably right, but it just reminded me after the debate, one of those Muslims came up to me and he was trying to correct me on how to say Allah.
Oh yeah, you've known for years that you're saying that, and you've always said you think it's funny that you're not giving that basic level of cordiality of pronouncing his name right.
Yeah, I just told the guy he's a false god anyways. He doesn't care how I pronounce his name. Yeah.
Oh, what are you going to complain that I'm pronouncing Baal wrong too? Come on. Here we go. This is separate. This is another one for the principal embarrassment. Why make up the authorship of Mark and Luke? So yeah, guys, the idea is if you are making up an author of a gospel, it makes sense to make up John. Right. Now, keep in mind, it doesn't mean that John didn't write John and so on. It's just if you were making stuff up, why would you go with Mark, who's almost unknown? He's mentioned and so on in Acts and so on, but he's mentioned here and there. But why would you be looking through the Bible and say, you know what, let's choose Mark or Luke? Why are you making that up? He's mentioned, but why are you going to pick him and say he wrote this gospel, especially when it actually fits? It makes sense. But what's interesting is that wouldn't be the most notorious. These wouldn't be the most notorious. Matthew would actually be the most notorious, right? As far as someone you would not pick. Why is that? Well, it seems that Matthew is writing to emphasize to a Jewish audience that Jesus is the Messiah. So that gospel is written, and suppose you want to attach a name to it. You just want to, let's just pick a name and say that this guy wrote it. Is Matthew the guy you would choose if you're trying to reach Jews with the gospel and the claim that Jesus is the Messiah? Who was Matthew, everyone? Tax collector. Who are the tax collectors? These were the guys who worked for the Romans to take taxes from the Jews to give that money to the Romans to use to lord it over them. This guy, apart from Judas, this would have been the most evil guy in the group for anyone watching. And so this would have been the last guy whose name you would have put on there, unless it's just true and that's what happened.
This also points up the fact that this was there from the very beginning, because in the nature of the case, if these Gospels were circulating anonymously, not only would they not have picked Mark, but you could be sure that they wouldn't have unanimously picked Mark. There'd have been a bunch of people saying, no, I think this person, I think that person. Think about it. When we do have a really anonymous book, like the book of Hebrews, there are different people, different candidates that are proposed for the authorship of the book of Hebrews. Some people say Luke, some say Apollos, some say Paul, right? Because it was really anonymous. But the Gospels, you don't have that. There's no question. Nobody is putting forward a different person. In fact, you mentioned Celsus earlier. You could go all across the heretical landscape, the pagans. Nobody questioned these authors as the actual author. Not even Marcion, who was trying to get rid of certain things. He only wanted the writings of Paul and Luke as long as he could edit them, right? But he didn't deny that Matthew, Mark, and John wrote the other Gospels. He just claimed these were all apostates. That was his way of dealing with it. But the point is that, gosh, this has got to be really early and really strong, that there are no alternative candidates being proposed, and they're not proposing the most obvious in all cases, and nobody's contesting. I mean, this is really, really strong. Plus, all of our Gospels have superscriptions or subscriptions or other things mentioned along the column indicating authorship. They're never circulating anonymously. The whole idea that they were circulating anonymously is a complete myth, that we don't have any evidence that they circulated anonymously.
David, this is Mosh Cohen. David, sorry for off topic, but I got a message yesterday from a Muslim living in Jerusalem, and he now declares himself a Christian, but he's afraid to go to the Christian holy sites due to fear of being recognized and to get spat on. Can you shortly share your experience here? So a couple things. One, if he's in Jerusalem and became a Christian, the only thing I would be concerned about as an ex-Muslim is that Muslims would recognize him and have a problem with him because he would be an apostate. But it sounds like you're saying he's worried about Jews recognize him as a Christian and spitting on him. I have to say, guys, I've been all over the place in Jerusalem and around the Sea of Galilee and Tel Aviv and so on. Wore a cross all over the place. Was rocking the cross the entire time. Been through the excavations, the archaeological digs and stuff like that outside the Temple Mount. Been all over the Temple Mount. Went to Michael Rappaport's bar mitzvah with like 40 or 50 IDF soldiers standing all around. And I was standing on a pillar the entire time because I was kind of recording downwards and so on. Never had one single person so much as look at me wrong in Israel. Ever. Not once. Been to the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. Been all over all the holy sites there. Me and AP were in the old city of Jerusalem, going all over the place. Never had one person so much as look at me wrong. So I definitely wouldn't worry about getting attacked for going to Christian holy sites. Still might be a concern for being an ex-Muslim, but yeah. So those would be my thoughts on that. Have yous ever heard of the annals of Emperor Hong Hu about Jesus' resurrection? No. And I probably wouldn't trust it if this is serious. Hi, Anthony Rogers. In Genesis 22, is the Malach Yahweh, Jesus, speaking on behalf of the Father, Zechariah 3, or himself when he swears by himself and declares Yahweh?
He's referring to himself. So the statement made is, "You've not withheld your son from me."
From me. Mm-hmm.
And that's the second of two significant things. He also countermands the original command. So think about this. Biblically, if God says something, no being can follow behind that and overturn it. It would have to be God himself who does so. So that's the principle that Paul's working on in Galatians 1 when he says, if an angel comes and contradicts what you've already heard, which I delivered to you from Jesus himself, he's to be anathema. But there's a story in the Old Testament where a prophet is told by God to go do something. Another person comes along and tells him, hey, God spoke to me and told me to tell you, don't do that. All bets are off. Go do this. And what happens is this spells his doom because he doesn't do what God told him. So if God commands it, it has to be God who countermands it. The angel tells Abraham not to sacrifice his son. Who does this angel think he is? But then he says, you haven't withheld him from me. And so naturally, when he swears, it's by himself. And that's what the author of Hebrews is picking up on when he says, when God made the promise to Abraham, since he could swear by no one greater, he swore by himself. So the author of Hebrews explicitly tells us that it was God who did this. So the angel of the Lord is God for all these reasons.
Hang on. Hey, Mosh, I just remembered something. So you said, go to the Christian holy sites. So this guy's worried about going to Christian holy sites and so on. I just wanted to point out, I forgot, because this was the first time I went to Israel, and this was like, I forget when, 2020, 2019 or something like that. So I went there and went to a coin shop in the old city of Jerusalem. It's in the Christian quarter. Went to a coin shop that Mike Lacona had been to before, and he got it like a denarius there or something like that the year before when he'd gone. So I wanted to get a denarius, a Tiberius denarius, so the familiar coin from the New Testament. So I went into the Christian coin shop, got the coin, and then I bought what is claimed to be, there's disputes about what these really are, but what is claimed to be a sort of tear collector. The claim is that people in the ancient world who cried a lot because of various tragedies would keep their tears in a bottle. You have David refer to this in a psalm. But the claim is that they would find these bottles. They would find these bottles in buried with people in ancient tombs and stuff like this, little empty bottles and so on. And there are two theories. One is that these were basically little bottles of perfume that you put there to make things smell better. But the other is that the people who were mourning would actually leave the bottle of their tears there. And so you get interesting interpretations of passages of Scripture if you're taking this into account. So when the woman wetted Jesus' feet with her tears, normally you just think she's crying and the tears are falling on Jesus' feet. But the idea would be, no, she comes with the bottle of her tears that she's been crying for years and actually pours them on his feet. So you get some interesting different meanings there. Anyway, so I was in there and I was talking to this guy, and I bought some. I bought the Tiberius denarius, and I bought that bottle, and I paid a lot of money for that stuff because that stuff it's first century stuff, very expensive, and you're getting it directly from an old city of Jerusalem. Anyway, I start talking to this guy because it's a Christian, and I mentioned ideal. I talked to Muslims and so on, preach the gospel to Muslims, and he said something like, "Oh yeah, we've got like our church reaches out to Muslims. We've got like 70 ex-Muslims in our church." And so I was like, "Whoa, that is awesome! You got 70 ex-Muslims in your church." And then I pointed out, "Hey, you ever heard of Nabil Qureshi?" He's like, "Oh yeah, we read Seeking Allah, Finding Jesus in there." I was like, "Oh yeah, I'm in that book." And then the guy goes, "Oh, why didn't you tell me before I billed you? I'd have given you such a better deal on stuff." Anyway, my point was actually funny, that he would have given me an awesomer deal if he had known that I'm in the book. But the point there is there are apparently churches with lots of ex-Muslims around there. That's where I was going with all that. So there are some churches around there that have ex-Muslims, so I would find those churches. Tell your friend to find those churches if you can. And here you have Anthony. Hey, Anthony, are all arguments against sin ultimately an appeal to God's authority, i.e. because he said so? Oh, hi, David. I don't know. Do you know what river means? Is he talking about like the logical problem of an appeal to authority? Because that's not what appeal to authority means, if that's what you mean, River.
Yeah, I'm not sure exactly what's behind this.
You would
I think
you would say that arguments against sin are an appeal to God's authority, because God, as our creator, is the authority over us, is the immortal authority over us, and as the ultimate standard of good and the ultimate source of good and the source of divine commands about what is right and what is wrong. Yes, sin is going against God's authority, something like that, right?
Yeah. I mean, I get that. I mean, sin is that which is contrary to the will of God. The will of God is that which is revealed to us in creation and special revelation, and that itself is in turn rooted in God's character, right? His unchanging, immutable character. So God is good and is the standard of goodness, and that's what's being expressed in His law to us. So, and I would say, apart from that, you don't really have not maybe I should put that stronger. You just don't have a objective standard of morality by which to judge things.
Yeah. So I think if I'm getting this right, as far as what could this objection or question actually mean, I think that it would be, well, if you're ultimately appealing to just what God says, isn't it kind of arbitrary? Like whatever God says, you have to take that, you have to obey that. And the idea here is that God commanding something would not be arbitrary, because God is good by nature, and therefore whatever He's commanding flows out of that nature, and so it's not arbitrary. Anyway, I'm just we're trying to figure this out, but
yeah, obviously. This discussion sounds like the Euthyphro dilemma.
Yeah,
right?
That's what I was thinking.
Mm-hmm. Is something holy because the gods love it, or do the gods love it because it's holy? And the way the conundrum's set up in Plato's dialogue, it presupposes polytheism. It doesn't presuppose the existence of an absolute God. So it's not as if there's this standard that exists independently of God or above God. It's not a creature of God that He could change and make differently, nor is it something above Him that He looks up to and decides, okay, I'm going to impose this. It's rooted in His character. And so, if I'm understanding Him correctly, that's what I would say to that.
One more that's kind of a follow-up, but I don't know how we got on this. Well, I do know how we got on this, but anyway, we had a couple more. Where was it? Where'd that follow-up go from a different person? Let's see. I saw it on one, and then I was trying to pull it up, but it went past me. Where is it, darn it? I might have lost it. I might not be able to find it. There was a follow-up question. It was actually a good follow-up on the topic.
Was it on the Angel of the Lord or Kohen or?
Wait, I see it over here. I just can't see it where I can put it on the screen. But Slam RN says, do we not sin just because God says so? Do we not sin just because God said so?
If God says so, I'd say that's a big reason not to do it, right?
That would be the main reason.
Yeah, but that's how we know it. The basis for it, I mean, it's not just because what some people would suggest is that in other words, morality is just arbitrary. Mm-hmm. In fact, certain versions of Islam are like this. They say that, in fact, almost every Muslim I've ever talked to seems in some way to approach this, even though they have different theologies, right? But every Muslim I've ever met, and if people haven't done this, they should ask a Muslim what the rules are in heaven. You might be surprised. They don't seem to think that the morality they might appear to be pursuing here on earth, even though that's not necessarily true either, right? I mean, look at Muhammad Hijab. But they think all bets are off in heaven, a lot of them. I asked a Muslim one time, I said, what are you going to be doing in heaven? He says, I'm going to be sleeping with prostitutes, smoking crack, and beating up angels. And I thought, what in the heck are you talking about? And he was expressing this idea that once you get to heaven, and that's the goal, you get to heaven, it's not being with Allah, it's not communion with Him, it's not worship, it's not all that comes with that. It's just finally the shackles are off. You can live unbridled according to your lusts, and everything goes. You could drink, you could have sex, you could, with multiple women, and, perpetually renew your, all that good stuff, right? So it seems as though in the Muslim context, morality is just rooted in Allah's arbitrary say-so. It's not rooted in his fixed nature, which is immutable and good or anything like that. But that is what's true in Christianity. God's say-so reflects his own character, which is immutable and absolute and therefore binding.
As far as do we not sin just because God says so? Slam RN. So if you're talking, my view would be some version of divine command theory, meaning that our moral obligations are ultimately commands of God. Now, people always misunderstand it and they think, oh, unless God tells you something, you don't know what to do. No, that's not. It's saying, what is the ultimate status of this? Like, take the claim, do not murder. What is that? What is that rule? Is it something that just I got from my parents? Or is this something that is wired into me by biology or something like that? What is it? Divine command theory says it's ultimately from God. Now, how God communicates that to you is a different story entirely. God could communicate it through you through conscience. God could put moral values in you, sort of like hardwiring beings into having those views or something like that. Can communicate through divine revelation, through Jesus, through inspired authors, and so on. God can get that message across to you in a ton of ways. In fact, once the message has been shared, it usually just being taught by one parent teaching their children and so on, and that's how it gets passed on. It's like mathematics, right? Like the rule 2 + 2. What is that? Well, it's true. How do you learn it? Well, people pass it on from one generation to the next and so on. Anyway, the idea is, what is 2 + 2 ultimately? 2 + 2. Well, that's some sort of truth, but you'll have philosophers trying to wrestle with that. Is that us figuring it out? Does that rule somehow exist? Do like mathematical rules somehow exist somewhere and so on? But the same thing with moral obligations. What are your moral obligations? Notice when you express them, what are my moral obligations? Like do not murder or something like that. They're expressed as commands. So they're already expressed as commands. So the question is, what's giving that command? If whatever you believe is the source of that command does not have the authority to say that you have to obey that, then guess what? You can still obey it. You can obey a rule just because you don't want to get in trouble. Just because you don't want to get in trouble or don't want to get arrested or something like this, or don't want to disappoint your parents or something like this, or don't want people to frown upon you. So people can follow the rules for all kinds of reason. The idea behind divine command theory is that certain rules ultimately go back to God, and so they have a divine authority behind them. And so you should follow them. You should follow them no matter what. Even if your society told you the opposite is true and said, hey, here's what you should do in this society, and we're going to go kill that group or something like that because our society doesn't like them or something like that. You could have moral obligations that transcend all of that. So as far as do we not sin just because God says so, there's probably no one who avoid sin just because God says so. In other words, there are all kinds of reasons about your position in a society and in a family and as a human being and so on. According to divine command theory, the actual moral obligations that you are obliged to follow ultimately come from God. And so notice, keep in mind, even an atheist could follow those exact same obligations. He just wouldn't recognize the authority. He wouldn't recognize or acknowledge where those commands come from. But you could still follow him. You could still follow him, even as an atheist. Even if you think, oh, this is something that was wired into my ancestors, and I think that, if I want to get the most out of life and not get in trouble, I have to follow these rules. So anyway, there can be all kinds of reasons for following the rules. But keep in mind, they're not arbitrary. And the main question is, what is the actual status of them? Because if it's just something that someone made up for a society at some point, you don't actually have a moral obligation to follow that. You may have a kind of obligation, like a legal obligation to do it, like you don't want to go to jail, but your moral obligations have to come from some kind of authority. And that's why Dostoevsky pointed out that if God does not exist, all is permissible. And let's see, we have Mosh here again. He's worried about both, but of course more from Islam. Okay, it makes sense to be concerned about that. Although I don't even know how common it is for Muslims to attack apostates in Israel, something like that. But good to be on the safe side, I would say. Quran speaks on the day of judgment. Verse, please. Quran speaks on the day of judgment. Verse, please. What? Oh, you mean? Oh, okay. He's talking about the Quran appearing. The Quran appearing as a pale man.
It's funny. You remember? So when in the debate that I just did with the Islamic cleric, you probably noticed me jumping on each time he said something about it, because I was very careful, only because I was thinking, I'm bringing this up. I'm not interested in going down the road of trying to go back and forth on, this hadith, that hadith being valid or not. So I wanted to make the barest of claims initially. So I just said, for example, the Quran is going to intercede for people on the day of resurrection, right? Yom el Qiyamah, according to the Islamic sources. That's found all over the hadith literature. But then the guy, the cleric I was debating, he said it's going to appear as a pale man, and I said absolutely. Like I love this. I was like, I pounced on it. I was like, I wanted to say that, but I wasn't interested in getting enmeshed in this hadith or that. That hadith, I believe, is in Jamiat Tirmidhi. But in any case, or even Majah, one of the two. But he gave it to me, right? So I was like, I'm running with it. And then he upped the ante again, and he talked about how certain surahs of the Quran are going to turn into flocks of birds.
Flocks of birds or clouds,
yeah, and ascend to Allah and so forth and intercede. So the answer in general is that these things are found in the hadith, and I mean, it wouldn't be too hard to pull some of these up. But
already grabbed it. CJ, it is Sunan Ibn Majah 3781. The Quran will come on the day of resurrection like a pale man and will say, I am the one that kept you awake at night and made you thirsty during the day. So you got it there. You can go to sunnah.com, sunnah.com. Matter of fact, you could just do a Google search, Sunan Ibn Majah 3781, and that will pop up. But yeah, it is kind of funny because fortunately you got him to say this, because what they always want to do is, Tawheed is so simple and easy to understand. We don't have anything confusing here. The Trinity, now that's some confusing stuff. You actually got to bring it all out. But it's basically, guys, no, it's not as simple as what you think. So you've got Allah, and Allah's speech is eternal, but the speech is actually a person who appears as a pale man. And then even though that pale man, the Quran, appears as one man, individual chapters of the Quran can appear as flocks of birds that are also interceding. So wait a minute. So the pale man that is the Quran can appear as a pale man. He's just one pale man, but within that man is somehow made up of individual chapters of the Quran that are like flocks of birds, like he's coming together like Voltron here. And even then, with the flocks of birds, you pointed out that that's sort of Muhammad's replacement paganism, because in the story of the satanic verses, I mean, they believed, even the pagans believed in like one God who's above the others, but that you have all these other gods and there's like intercessors for you. And so the story of the satanic verses is Alat, Alus, and Manat. These three pagan goddesses were called the exalted cranes. They're birds. And the idea is you pray to them and they can carry your prayers up to Allah. So remember, in the hadith, Muhammad says that when Allah wants to hear your prayers, he has to actually come down and hear them. Or he's bad at hearing. So he has to come down and hear your prayers. Well, guess what? You could get the same result in a different way. You could have bird goddesses carrying your prayers up to Allah, and then he doesn't have to come down, cuts down his workload, right? So they believed in these pagan goddesses who could intercede for you. Muhammad actually delivered a revelation as part of Surah 53, saying you can now pray to pagan goddesses because they can carry your prayers up to Allah. But later on, he came back and said, oops, the devil made me do it. And what Anthony pointed out in that debate isn't it interesting that you have these chapters of the Quran that are interceding for you, and they're described as flocks of birds. So what are they doing? You still have intercessors between you and God. You've got Allah, and you've got you, and you've got these birds who are interceding for you, but they're not pagan goddesses. They're chapters of the Quran.
Yeah. Isn't it interesting that the Muhammad who didn't like people entering through back doors had to go through the front door? Remember, there's a whole verse in the Quran where Allah, speaking from heaven, has to tell people to make sure they enter through the front doors rather than the back. He was apparently really upset about that. But this is funny to me because it seems to me like Muhammad ushered out through the front door certain ideas of the pagans, but then he reintroduced them quietly.
He just came up with Islamic versions of them, the exact same ideas.
Yeah. And this is just one example. Like there's countless examples of this.
Mm-hmm. Wild, wild, wild stuff. Signing off, guys. We'll finish the stream tomorrow. Happy early Easter. Yeah, I think we should be signing off. We'll take these last couple of super chats and probably sign off because we'll see what else is coming up. I know Wes eventually gets to Islam and the Islamic dilemma. I'm not sure whether I'll make a video about that or whether we'll do another live stream, but I'll check it out. So let's see. Oops. Hey, Reverend Anthony Rogers, best resource on Jesus as the angel of the Lord.
Drawing a blank on, there's a book. It was a doctoral dissertation written many, many years ago that I read. Well, I see Always Good on my channel all the time, so I'll try and tell you once I remember his name. But it's not hard to get. I got it. I mean, way back, but it is a doctoral dissertation, so you have to get it from the university or whatever. Gunther Juncker. His name is spelt Juncker, but it's Gunther Juncker, and it's called Jesus and the Angel of the Lord, and then it's got some subtitle. It's very exhaustive. I mean, it's a really, really good book, though. Better than anything else I've seen that's actually been published. But there is a lot of good stuff published, too. But I can give you a bigger list later.
Mm-hmm. River Chase says, thanks, guys. Yep. Speaking of satanic verses, thank you, Dawood, for calling the best reader in the book. Rushdie's masterpiece was funny, Islamophobic, and an eye-opener. I could not read it. It was too painful. David, I love your work. It's inspiring me as both a Christian and a philosopher. Your Death of Socrates backdrop is incredible. Would you consider a video comparing ancient philosophy with Christian thought? He is risen. I hadn't thought about that. I do. I mean, I set up a philosophy channel back a while back, but then I started focusing on getting this channel up and running, but I still want to get back to it. And I mean, one of the things I want to do is just kind of, well, one, there are certain very important works in philosophy that everyone needs to be basically familiar with. And so I want to make things like understanding Plato's Republic in 10 minutes, something like, okay, maybe you're not going to actually read Plato's Republic, but you need to get the gist because it's really, really important. So stuff like that. But yeah, I mean, I definitely want to go through the pre-Socratic philosophers and then Socrates, Plato, Aristotle, and so on. Yeah, because these guys are sort of setting the intellectual stage before the rise of Christianity. But yeah, I haven't thought about what you're saying specifically, but you'll be getting some philosophy videos here in the near future as soon as this channel is fully up and running and stable and functional. I'll get back to some philosophy videos. All right, everyone. So yeah, there's a lot more in the Piers Morgan interview. I didn't add it to the description yet. I'll go ahead and add this right now as soon as we're wrapping up. But interesting discussion, and I still have to finish watching the rest of it, see if we're going to do another live stream to cover part 2. But we got through a good section of it. Definitely check out Anthony's debate. The link is in the description box. This was at North Carolina State University. Had Christians and Muslims there. Super cool. I got to talk, I was talking to one Muslim afterwards and stuff like that, and he was asking if I'd be willing to debate a local imam. I don't think the local imam is going to do it, but I said absolutely. So anyway, but anyway, lots of cool stuff in that debate. I'm going to make a couple videos about it, and we'll be discussing the Islamic dilemma portions of that debate because we're doing a lot on the Islamic dilemma this year. Anthony, what do you got coming up that you'll be working on?
So I am starting a series on the Gospel of Mark. It's sort of a reboot. I was doing it before and set it aside to pursue some other stuff, but I'm going to be going through it quite meticulously. And this, I'm excited about it because it's an opportunity. I'll probably be doing it for years because I'm not just going to be looking at Mark, but using it as a springboard to look at some other stuff. So as things come up, I'm going to talk about it. But as you know, Mark is the gospel that's supposedly the least Christological, or at least has a low Christology, and I'll just be showing that's just not even close to being true. From the very first verse to the end of the book, it's shot through with evidence for Christ's deity. So that's one thing on my channel. As far as other stuff, my main time is spent going into prisons where I belong and speaking the gospel to people there. I think I told you as an aside, I was there one day and somebody says, we want you to meet the coach, because the coach apparently talks to people about the Lord and even engages the Muslims there on the prison yard. And so I met him, and he started talking to me about this guy named David Wood. And I thought it was funny because, but anyways, he's benefited from you. And then I left, and then I came back the next day, and the inmates were telling me he realized who you are. Like he recognized me. I'm not on the show as often, right? So it's easy to not see me. But if he's been around for a while, he knows that, I was here way back. But anyways, kind of funny. So I try to keep my extracurricular activities sort of down low for the prison because, I'm just trying to go in there and minister to people. And I like interacting with the Muslims when it's possible. And in my mind, ideally, if I can just interact with them from that start, without any background coloring it, that to me is ideal because they know I'm coming in there out of a genuine interest in their souls. But, once they find out I've been doing this sort of stuff for decades, then they all of a sudden I'm public enemy. Yeah. But anyways, so word is out in the prison. And but that's mostly what I do. I do have other speaking events that I'll be at, which I announce on my channel as they happen.
All right, so guys, there's a link to Anthony's channel in the description. There's a link to his most recent debate on his channel, and he'll have more cool stuff coming up. So be sure to follow Anthony. And tomorrow, not sure exactly what AP's schedule is. I think we're going live on AP's channel tomorrow. If not, then Anthony, I'll be on here again, and we'll finish this up because there is more cool stuff. And again, Wes starts talking about Islam. Well, Piers asks him about Islam and the Quran coming up, and so we'll check that out. So we'll be live one way or another tomorrow night. Just check which channel it's on. And two final super chats from Mosh Cohen here. So says, it's super common here. I asked him about treatment of apostates and stuff over there. Said I didn't know how it is in Israel. Said too many cases of murder for apostasy or gays. Even if you get asylum in Israel, they'll still attempt to find you and probably will. Okay, well in that case then, yeah, tell your buddy to be super careful. And yeah, that makes sense. Google Ahmed Abu Mahria, his case hunts ex-Muslims. Interesting. Okay, I got that. All right, everyone. I will catch you all tomorrow, either with AP or with Anthony. And we'll check out some cool stuff. All right, catch you all then. Happy Easter.